Chapter 191. Once she left the restaurant, Tienge already had a destination in mind. She walked straight along the main street. After walking for a short distance, she saw a very luxurious blue cloud building in the center of the city. As soon as she entered the restaurant, a waiter immediately came to greet her with a big smile. "Fairy, please go upstairs, please go upstairs." Tienge nodded and followed the waiter all the way to the third floor. As soon as she reached the third floor, she immediately felt several gazes on her. She discreetly sized up her surroundings. Compared to the first floor, the third floor was less luxurious, but it was more elegant. There were about 5 or 6 mahogany tables in the spacious space. Each table was separated by flowers and trees, looking extremely elegant. There were already 3 tables occupied by guests. All of them were male cultivators, and their cultivation levels were all in the aura refining realm. Tienge thought to herself that Bichuan Court was, after all, a small or medium-sized cultivation group. If individual cultivators could cultivate to the foundation building realm, they would have been recruited long ago, even if they were male cultivators. At the first table, there were 2 middle-aged men who were chatting animatedly. When they saw Tienge, they glanced at her with some surprise, but they soon turned back to continue their conversation. At the second table, there were both young and old people who were chatting casually. Upon seeing her, several people stared at her as if they were trying to guess her origin. At the third table, there were 3 young people chatting loudly. They seemed to be the children of some cultivation clans. They weren't as down and out as individual cultivators. "Fairy, this way please." The waiter led Tienge to an empty table and swiftly served her tea. He asked, "Fairy, what would you like to order?" Tienge muttered to herself for a moment, then said, "Some refreshments will be fine." "Yes, yes," the waiter said repeatedly. "Please wait a moment, Fairy. It'll be served soon." After the waiter went downstairs, Tienge picked up the teacup and took a leisurely sip. The manager of the small restaurant told her that in Linhai town, most cultivators and mortals lived together. Mortals were very respectful to cultivators, so cultivators enjoyed a lot of power here. In Linhai town, mortals treated both Bichuan Court disciples and individual cultivators with extreme respect. There were even some facilities specially prepared for cultivators, such as the 3rd floor of the Azure Cloud restaurant. This was the biggest restaurant in Linhai town. Reportedly, the boss had a very good relationship with the fairies of Bichuan Court. The 3rd floor of the Azure Cloud restaurant was only open to cultivators. Any cultivator, even if they were only in the first layer of the aura refining realm, could eat and drink here for free. Therefore, no matter if it was the disciples of the sects, clans, or independent cultivators in the vicinity of Waterfront City, they would all come to the Azure Cloud brothel when they had nothing to do and exchange some news. After inquiring about these things, Tienge didn't say anything else and came to this place. The reason why he didn't ask the shopkeeper directly was because the shopkeeper was, after all, a mortal. Some things were more reliable to hear from the mouth of a cultivator. As she sat there, she had already sized up all the people at the 3 tables. She had the spirit-concealing pendant with her, so she deliberately suppressed her cultivation level to make others feel that she was still in the aura-refining realm, but they couldn't see through her. Among the 8 or 9 cultivators here, the strongest one was only in the 6th layer of the aura-refining realm, so they didn't notice anything strange at all. Not long after the waiter went downstairs, the 3 young men at the 3rd table looked at each other. One of them got up and walked over to her. "Fellow Daoist, I'm Wei Ziming. Nice to meet you." Tienge pretended to have just noticed him and stood up to greet him. "I'm Yi Xiaotian. Nice to meet you, fellow Daoist Wei." Seeing that she returned his greeting, a hint of joy flashed across Wei Ziming's eyes. He greeted her again. "So it's Miss Yi." Just now, he called her fellow Daoist, but now he called her Mississippi. Tienge smiled without batting an eyelid. "Fellow Daoist Wei is too polite. Is there something I can help you with?" "Oh, it's like this." Seeing that her attitude was kind, Wei Ziming also smiled from ear to ear. "I wonder if Miss is alone? If you are, it's fate that we met. How about we talk about the path of immortality together?" Emo Tienga was sitting there because she was waiting for someone to take the initiative to talk to her. Now that she heard Wei Ziming's words, she thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "How can I refuse fellow Daoist Wei's kindness? I'm also bored sitting here by myself, so I'll accept your invitation." Wei Ziming was overjoyed. "Miss, please come over here." He then shouted, "Waiter!" Thump, 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 sounds of footsteps could be heard from the stairway. A waiter immediately ran up with Emo Tienga's tea and pastries in his hands. Wei Ziming waved his hand and said, "Take our table away and bring another good one." The waiter's gaze shifted. He understood what Emo Tienga meant, so he immediately nodded and bowed. "Yes, yes." He then put the tea and pastries aside, tidied up the three people's table, and went downstairs. Since the third floor was specially set up for cultivators, the waiter's attitude was naturally attentive. Soon, several other people came up and once again served hot dishes, wine, and delicacies. Cultivators in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm and above would gradually lose their sense of worldly affairs. These people were all below the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, so they naturally ate and drank like mortals. "Miss Yi, please." Wei Ziming smiled. The two young cultivators sitting at the same table with him also stood up with a kind attitude. Emo Tienga raised her hand to greet these people before sitting down. As soon as she sat down, Wei Ziming eagerly poured wine for her. "Miss Yi, let me introduce you. These are my two good friends, Huang Jifeng and Yu Yang." Emo Tienga raised her head to look at the two of them. Wei Ziming had the demeanor of a distinguished young master. Huang Jifeng's demeanor was slightly inferior to his, but he was a bit more handsome. Yu Yang, on the other hand, was very shy and seemed to be the youngest among them. He seemed to be less than 20 years old. Among the three of them, the one with the highest cultivation level was Wei Ziming, who was in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. The other two were both in the 4th layer. Emo Tienga inwardly speculated that these three people were undoubtedly the children of cultivation clans. She was quite experienced now, so she usually wouldn't make a mistake. "I'm Yi Xiaotian. Greetings to the two fellow Daoists." She politely raised her hand to greet them. Her attitude seemed to make the two people feel somewhat flattered. They hastily returned her greeting while repeatedly saying they didn't dare. Emo Tienga felt a bit strange. Even if her cultivation level was higher than theirs, she only suppressed it to around the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, so they didn't need to greet her like this. After the four people finished greeting each other, Wei Ziming raised his cup and said with a smile, "May I know which fairy of Bishuan Court is Miss Ye's disciple?" Emo Tienga smiled, then said faintly, "I'm not a disciple of Bishuan Court." The moment she said that, the three of them were stunned. Wei Ziming blinked as if he didn't quite believe her. He then asked with a slight stutter, "Miss? You have this kind of cultivation level, but why aren't you a disciple of Bishuan Court?" Emo Tienga smiled and said, "To be honest, I'm an individual cultivator from Kunwo. I came here by accident, but I don't know how to leave." As she said that, Emo Tienga secretly paid attention to their reactions. However, she saw that all three of them had astonished expressions. Huang Jifeng glanced at his companion, then asked, "Miss Yi isn't from Linhai?" Emo Tienga nodded. "Correct." The three people looked at each other. There seemed to be pleasant surprise in their eyes. In the end, it was still Wei Ziming who spoke. His attitude was very enthusiastic. "I really didn't expect Miss Yi to be an outsider. There are very few outsiders in Linhai, so it's also difficult for us to leave. Miss Yi, how did you come to Linhai?" Emo Tienga smiled faintly. "I came through a transporting formation." "A transporting formation?" The three people exclaimed in surprise. Soon afterward, Huang Jifeng said anxiously, "Miss, do you know where there's a transporting formation that connects Linhai and Kunwo? It's not Bishuan Court's transporting formation, right?" "You've misunderstood." Upon seeing their reactions, Emo Tienga felt more confident. "I came through a random transporting formation outside. I didn't come through a fixed transporting formation." "Oh." Hearing her words, the three of them revealed a look of disappointment at the same time. Emo Tienga swept her gaze over them, thinking in her heart, At first, the three of them thought she was a Bishuan court disciple, so they were both enthusiastic and polite to her. Bishuan court was very powerful in Linhai, so female cultivators' statuses were much higher than male cultivators, so the three of them wanted to befriend her. However, because Bishuan court's female disciples had always been arrogant, they basically wouldn't be so polite to outsiders, so the three of them were rather flattered. When she said she wasn't a Bishuan court disciple, not only were the three of them not disappointed, but they were also pleasantly surprised. Mo Tiange speculated that it was very likely because Bishuan court's female disciples all had very arrogant attitudes. In Linhai, almost all women with spiritual roots entered Bishuan court, so it was rare for the three of them to meet a female cultivator they could get close to, so they were pleasantly surprised. In the end, when they learned she came from the outside, the first thing they asked was about the transporting formation. They were very disappointed when they heard there was no transporting formation in Linhai. Apparently, aside from Bishuan court, the cultivators here were also trapped in this small area and couldn't leave, so they were very interested in the transporting formation. Judging from this, the cultivators in Linhai also had no way to leave, so it was probably impossible for them to return to Kunwo without going through Bishuan court. Once she finished thinking, Mo Tiange showed just enough surprise on her face. Fellow Daoists, is there no transporting formation here? Or a way out? Huang Jifeng shook his head then said with a bitter smile, Miss Yi, we won't hide this from you. Linhai is a small place isolated in the eastern sea by demonic mountain range. To the west of us is the Devil Path, and to the east is the sea. There's basically no way out. Mo Tiange looked even more surprised, but there was also a hint of panic. Then what should I do? I still have to go back to Kunwo. Yu Yang, who'd been silent all this while, finally spoke. Miss Yi, you don't need to worry. If you were a male cultivator, it would indeed be difficult, but you're a woman so you can ask Bishuan court for help. Mo Tiange looked puzzled. Fellow Daoist Yu, what do you mean? Does Bishuan court have a transporting formation to leave? Wei Ziming took over the conversation, but instead of answering he asked, Fellow Daoist Yi, do you know anything about the cultivation world in Linhai? Mo Tiange nodded. After I arrived here I asked around so I know a bit about it. Wei Ziming continued to say, Bishuan court is the only cultivation group in Linhai, and it's also a cultivation group for female cultivators. At this point, a hint of embarrassment appeared on his face. Therefore, the status of female cultivators is slightly higher than that of male cultivators. Female cultivators can enter Bishuan court as long as they have spiritual roots, but male cultivators like us have to either have very good spiritual roots or have a high cultivation level in order to be accepted as outer disciples by Bishuan court. Moreover, only after performing dual cultivation with a female disciple can they be considered real Bishuan court disciples. The same goes for cultivators from outside Linhai. In recent years, although there were very few foreign cultivators, they'd occasionally come across foreign cultivators. If they were female cultivators, they'd either be recruited by Bishuan court or they'd pay a certain price for Bishuan court to send them out of Linhai. Male cultivators, on the other hand, weren't so lucky. If they wanted to leave, they'd have to pay an even bigger price. Therefore, Miss Yi, you can ask Bishuan court for help. Maybe they'll be willing to let you go. Mo Tiange was silent for a while before she nodded. I see. Thank you, fellow Daoists, for telling me. Huang Jifeng hesitated for a moment then asked, Miss Yi, your cultivation level is higher than ours, so presumably, Bishuan court will definitely recruit you. If you're only an individual cultivator in Kunwu, it'd be better for you to join Bishuan court. Bishuan court is a cultivation group for female cultivators, so they take great care of their female disciples. If you join Bishuan court, you might even have a chance to build your foundation. Mo Tiange looked embarrassed. But I want to go back to Kunwu, Wei Ziming said. Miss Yi, if you don't want to join Bishuan court and want to go back to Kunwu, I have to remind you first. At this point, he paused for a moment to confirm there was a sound-insulating barrier around them before he continued to say, Bishuan court is very powerful in Linhai, they always mean what they say. If they really recruit you and you don't agree, it won't be good for you if you provoke them. Wei Ziming spoke very tactfully, But Imo Tienga could hear the warning in his words. Apparently, her previous guess was right. Bichuan court wasn't only powerful, but it was also very overbearing. They couldn't be offended easily. She thought for a moment, then said with a smile, "Thank you for reminding me, fellow Daoists. Are all fellow Daoists local cultivators? Could it be that you've never gone out?" Huang Jifeng smiled bitterly. "To be honest, miss, we're all from small local cultivation clans. Not only have we never gone out, but none of the elders in our clans have either. It's all because of Linhai's special terrain that most of us Linhai cultivators have never gone out in our entire lives. But what can we do? Only Bichuan court has a way to go out, but they're also unwilling to open the transporting formation." Wei Ziming sighed and said, "Our biggest wish is to cultivate to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, enter Bichuan court, successfully build our foundation, and perform dual cultivation with Bichuan court's female disciples. That's the only way we'll have a chance to go out." Yu Yang said with a yearning expression, "I heard from my father that an ancestor of our Yu clan once left Linhai. When he came back, he told the younger generation that the outside world is very big. Kunwu alone has a whole mountain range that's tens of thousands of miles wide. Aura refining cultivators like us have to walk for more than half a year to reach it from the east to the west. There are also many cultivation groups outside. My ancestor said there are more male cultivators among the high-level cultivators in the outside world, while female cultivators." At this point, Yu Yang stopped and cast a somewhat embarrassed glance at Imo Tienga. "Miss Yi, please don't mind me. I was just speaking thoughtlessly." Imo Tienga smiled. "It's nothing. What fellow Daoist you said is the truth. In Kunwu, there are indeed more male cultivators among the high-level cultivators." Seeing as she didn't mind, Yu Yang smiled gratefully, then asked curiously, "Miss Yi, you came from Kunwu. Can you tell us something about the outside world?" What do fellow Daoists want to hear? Upon hearing that she was willing to talk about the outside world, the three people's eyes brightened. Wei Ziming asked, "Miss Yi, how big is Kunwu? Are there really a lot of cultivation groups? How many are the biggest? Are there a lot of nascent soul cultivators?" This Wei Ziming was really impatient. He immediately asked a series of questions. Imo Tienga smiled and said, "Don't worry, fellow Daoist Wei. Let me think. I also don't know how big Kunwu is. Based on the walking distance of a foundation-building cultivator, it would take them about a month to fly from east to west. As for aura-refining cultivators, just like fellow Daoist you said, it would indeed take them more than half a year. Based on this, it's at least several tens of thousands of miles, maybe even more. There are probably several hundred cultivation groups in Kunwu, but most of them are small cultivation groups. The entire cultivation group might only have several hundred people, and the highest cultivation level among them is only in the foundation building realm. Big cultivation groups, on the other hand, have several thousand aura refining disciples, more than 100 foundation building disciples, and several nascent soul cultivators. But so many people! Yu Yang exclaimed, "Bichuan court only has about 1,000 disciples, and there are only a few dozen foundation building cultivators. Is that so?" Imo Tienga took this opportunity to ask, "Then does Bichuan court have any core formation cultivators?" Yu Yang nodded. Bichuan court currently has 3 core formation cultivators. Oh, if that's the case, they'd be considered a medium or small cultivation group in Kunwu. 3 core formation cultivators wasn't considered much in Kunwu. Back then, Yunwu sect also had 7 or 8 core formation cultivators, but Yunwu sect was only a medium cultivation group. For a medium cultivation group like this, if they had nascent soul cultivators, they could develop into a big cultivation group. If they didn't, they could only maintain the structure of a medium cultivation group. Upon hearing her understatement, Wei Ziming and the others said in amazement, "Bichuan court isn't considered a big cultivation group in Kunwu? Then what are Kunwu's big cultivation groups like? Do they only count if they have nascent soul cultivators?" Imo Tienga nodded. Correct. Not to mention big cultivation groups, even some medium cultivation groups with great influence in Kunwu all have nascent soul cultivators. I reckon there are about 50 to 60 nascent soul cultivators in all of Kunwu, and most of them are in the 7 big cultivation groups. The 7 big cultivation groups. Huang Jifeng said, I've heard that 6 of the 7 big cultivation groups in the celestial pole are in Kunwu. They're very powerful, and there are also many nascent soul cultivators in their groups. Emotienga shook her head and said with a smile, how could there be many nascent soul cultivators? Reaching the nascent soul realm isn't that easy. Tiandao sect, which is known as the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole, only has 7 nascent soul cultivators, and that's only when they were at their peak. 7 nascent soul cultivators. The 3 of them showed expressions of yearning. For them, nascent soul cultivators only existed in legends. It had been many years since a nascent soul cultivator appeared in Bishuan Court. It was said that aside from the founder of the group, there was only one nascent soul cultivator 1,000 years ago. After that person passed away, no one else was able to advance to the nascent soul realm, and there weren't many core formation cultivators either. Miss Yi, can you tell us more about the 7 big cultivation groups? If their previous attitude was polite, then right now, it already carried a hint of closeness and flattery. Although the 3 of them were children of cultivation clans and Mo Tienga claimed to be an individual cultivator, they lived in Linhai while she came from Kunwu, so she had seen much more of the world than them. Mo Tienga smiled. Of course, it's nothing. The 7 big cultivation groups in the celestial pole are Tiandao sect, Xianxia school, Gujian sect, Zhengfa sect, Biyun sect, Lingshou school, and Danding school. Among them, Zhengfa sect is located in the northernmost glaciers and has only one branch in Kunwu. Tiandao sect is known as the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole and has the largest number of disciples, about 6,000 to 7,000 aura refining disciples. While Mo Tienga told them about the outside world, she also slowly mentioned Bishuan Court. Seeing how straightforward she was, the 3 of them also told her about Bishuan Court without holding anything back. Linhai wasn't very big. It was only a big city with tens of thousands of fishermen and farmers living around it, so Bishuan Court's scale wasn't very big. Including the outer disciples, Bishuan Court's total number of disciples barely reached more than 1,000. There were 30 to 40 foundation building cultivators, 3 core formation cultivators, and a nascent soul cultivator that hadn't appeared for a long time. Among the 3 core formation cultivators, one was in the middle stage of the core formation realm while the other 2 were in the early stage. Bishuan Court's conduct had always been very overbearing. Because they were the only cultivation group in the area, it was inevitable that they would be arrogant and would often treat individual cultivators with a high and mighty attitude. Wei Ziming sighed. Unfortunately, we can't go out. If we could, we'd definitely find a cultivation group and cultivate diligently. How could we possibly be bullied by a group of women? Mo Tienga looked up at him. Fellow Daoist Wei, do you think you're being bullied by women? Realizing he said something wrong, Wei Ziming promptly smiled and said, Miss Yi, please don't misunderstand. It's just that Bishuan Court's conduct is indeed a bit overbearing. Usually, their words are the law in Linhai, so I'm just a bit. Mo Tienga smiled and said faintly, so what if Bishuan Court isn't a cultivation group for women? As long as it's powerful, it's inevitable that it'll be overbearing. Women aren't the only ones. Yes, Miss Yi is right. Wei Ziming smiled apologetically. I misspoke. Mo Tienga waved her hand. It's nothing. She paused for a moment then sighed. Not to mention anything else, the founder of Bishuan Court is really amazing. Women in cultivation are always trapped by their emotions and aren't decisive enough. It's already very rare for this founder to be able to establish such a foundation here. These were her heartfelt words. There were also cultivation groups for women in Kunwu, but none of them were as powerful as Bishuan Court. Most of them were just small cultivation groups under the control of others. Bishuan Court dominated the area. Although this was due to the terrain, it wasn't easy for them to establish such a cultivation group. That's true. Huang Jifeng's eyes shone with admiration. Although we don't like Bishuan Court's way of doing things, no one in Linhai City is dissatisfied with the founder of Bishuan Court. Not only Huang Jifeng, but even Yu Yang also nodded. Brother Huang is right. The founder of Bishuan Court is the beacon and idol in the hearts of cultivators in Linhai City. Mo Tiange was quite interested. Fellow Daoist, can you tell me about it? Huang Jifeng said, to talk about Bishuan Court's founder, we have to start from the origin of Linhai. 100,000 years ago, the righteous path and the devil path fought a great war in the celestial pole. In the end, the devil path was defeated and moved to the north of Demonic Mountain, never setting foot in Kunwu again. The devil path moved to the northeast and operated in the mountain range to the north of Demonic Mountain. This part of the mountain range was covered with dense forests, undulating hills, and the terrain was complex. Coincidentally, there was such a small area in the Eastern Sea, which happened to be sandwiched between this mountain range and the Eastern Sea, becoming an isolated area. To the east was the sea, to the west was the mountain range where the devil path was active, and there were no roads to the north or south. The people of Linhai lived like this for tens of thousands of years, completely losing contact with other places in the celestial pole. Cultivation techniques were incomplete, resources were scarce, and there were no high-level cultivators. Even if there were very talented people, it was very difficult for them to achieve anything. Even pill concocting and tool refining were slowly lost. Occasionally, some cultivators accidentally came to Linhai and passed down some cultivation techniques and the Tao of pill concocting and tool refining. Huang Jifeng took a sip of tea, then went on to say, about 10,000 years ago, a female cultivator also accidentally came here. Unlike those people, her cultivation level was very high. She was a nascent soul cultivator. At that time, even foundation-building cultivators were rarely seen in Linhai. There were only 1 or 2 of them left. A nascent soul cultivator suddenly came, so all the cultivators in Linhai naturally respected her. That was Bishuan Court's Grandmaster, Primordial Lady Bishui. We said Primordial Lady Bishui was amazing not because she established Bishuan Court here. With her identity as a nascent soul cultivator, it was too easy for her to establish a cultivation group here. What was amazing about her was that not only did she establish a cultivation group, but she also established Linhai Town and even built a transporting formation, allowing us people in Linhai to finally go to other places in the celestial pole through the transporting formation. Correct. Wei Ziming nodded. The reason why it's a cultivation group for female cultivators is because Primordial Lady Bishui rescued a group of female cultivators who were used as human furnaces by Kunwu cultivators and established Bishuan Court with them. I see. Mo Tiange muttered. No wonder female cultivators were respected in Bishuan Court while male cultivators had low status. So there was actually such a reason. That being the case, not only was Primordial Lady Bishui worthy of admiration, but the other Bishuan Court disciples also weren't domineering. Their seniors were once used as human furnaces by male cultivators, so they naturally didn't treat male cultivators well. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange even felt a bit of admiration. It really wasn't easy for these female cultivators to become independent. Chapter 192. After she finished listening to Wei Ziming and the others, Mo Tiange asked for a room in Azure Cloud Building. When the manager of Azure Cloud Building heard she wanted to stay here for the time being, he even prepared a small courtyard for her. Obviously, cultivators enjoyed a lot of benefits in Linhai Town. Because of this, Mo Tiange felt her previous deduction was a bit rash. Although Bishuan Court was powerful and controlled non-sect individual cultivators, it also gave them a lot of benefits. In any case, the terrain here was special, so it wasn't up to a foreign cultivator like her to judge Bishuan Court's actions. Originally, the 3 of them competed to invite her to their clans as a guest, but Mo Tiange politely declined. She wanted to leave Linhai Town as soon as possible and return to Kunwu. It was better not to get involved with the clans here. Bishuan Court was powerful here, so it would be troublesome if she violated their taboo. Through Wei Ziming and the others' conversation, Mo Tiange gained a general understanding of Linhai's situation. According to them, Linhai Town was Bishuan Court's world. Cultivators in Linhai couldn't bypass Bishuan Court no matter what they wanted to do. For Mo Tiange, as long as Bishuan Court controlled the only transporting formation connected to the outside world in Linhai, they would always have to deal with them. However, she had to think carefully about how to deal with them. Wei Ziming and the others once said that in the beginning, Bishuan Court's transporting formation wasn't limited to its own disciples. If individual cultivators wanted to use it, they could use it as long as they paid enough spirit stones or other valuables. Linhai had been isolated from the outside world for generations, so it lacked spirit stones and valuables. Individual cultivators often had to use all their savings to use the transporting formation. However, no one objected to this because the transporting formation itself consumed a lot of spirit stones. If they didn't accept valuables, Bishuan Court would simply suffer a loss. Later on, Bishuan Court started asking for more and more valuables until no individual cultivator could afford it. From then on, the transporting formation became Bishuan Court's exclusive use. Up to now, if individual cultivators wanted to use it again, Bishuan Court would offer a sky-high price to make those individual cultivators retreat. After learning about this, Mo Tiange had several ideas. The first method was to directly state her identity. With Xianxia School's name, Bishuan Court would presumably have to give them some face. Nevertheless, Bishuan Court was different from cultivation groups in Kunwo after all. Linhai's terrain was special, so they were the only group in Linhai. Even if Xianxia School became the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole, it still wouldn't affect them. The second possibility was just like Wei Ziming and the others said, Bishuan Court saw her cultivation level was pretty good, so they'd probably try to recruit her. At that time, when she became a disciple of Bishuan Court, she'd naturally be able to request to use the transporting formation. But if she did that, she'd inevitably made a simple matter complicated. She originally just wanted to borrow the transporting formation, but in the end, it became a deception. If people from Bishuan Court found out about this, not only would they refuse to lend her the transporting formation, but they might even kill her to vent their anger. There was a third method. They said that there had been a small number of foreign cultivators who accidentally came to Linhai. If they were male cultivators, it would be more troublesome, but as for female cultivators, they would either be recruited or pay a certain price to be teleported away. She might as well act like she did just now, claiming to be an individual cultivator and saying she was willing to pay the price to borrow Bishuan Court's path. She thought for a long time but still couldn't decide which method to use. All of a sudden, she changed her mind and couldn't help but laugh. In fact, this was only a very simple matter. Why did she think it was so complicated? Aside from Yen Ruoshu and her 2 companions, she basically had nothing to do with Bishuan Court. Yen Ruoshu and her 2 companions dying in Ziwei's Immortal's cave wasn't her responsibility. In other words, she had no enmity with Bishuan Court, so she didn't have to worry about them making things difficult for her. Regardless of whether she was a Xianxia School disciple or an individual cultivator, Bishuan Court was a cultivation group for female cultivators. Judging from the tone of Wei Ziming and the others, they wouldn't be too harsh on female cultivators who didn't belong to their group. She could just openly tell them the truth. Why did she have to rack her brain to think of a foolproof excuse? In the end, she'd encountered too many problems, so she always wanted to avoid danger and ended up going headfirst into a dead end. How could there be foolproof things in this world? She was still a human now, not an immortal, and she wasn't even a high-level cultivator. She couldn't even sense the mandate of heaven. She also wasn't smart enough to take every possibility into account. She just had to be careful when handling things, but it was basically impossible to avoid all risks. With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange already made her decision. Since she had no choice but to go through Bishuan Court, she'd better go and ask for help. In addition, in Ziwei's Immortal's cave, she and Daoist Fangjing once divided the dead people's belongings. Among them were Yen Ruoshu's and her 2 companions' belongings. She had to hide them well when she went to Bishuan Court. The less trouble the better. This kind of adventuring together couldn't be explained clearly, so it was better not to talk about it. After resting in Blue Cloud Building for a day, the next day, Mo Tiange went to Bishuan Court's shop in Linhai Town, Blue Water Pavilion, according to the shopkeeper's directions. Mo Tiange stepped into this small shop, which looked completely the same as Immortal's shop, and her gaze swept over the shop. This shop wasn't big, it only had 2 storefronts. However, although it was small, it had everything it needed. Cultivation techniques, medicinal pills, spirit tools, and materials all had counters for sale. There was even a place to receive goods. The people guarding the counters were all low-level aura refining cultivators. Tiange noticed that all of them were male cultivators. Upon seeing her entering the shop, the low-level cultivators guarding the shop were all dumbfounded. However, someone quickly regained his composure and came to greet her. Senior? This time, Tiange suppressed her cultivation level to the early stage of the foundation building realm. After all, the late stage of the foundation building realm could be considered very high. Bichuan Court only had 3 core formation cultivators in total, so the late stage of the foundation building realm might attract the attention of the core formation elders. As for the aura refining realm, if her cultivation level was too low, she might be looked down upon. Although this person called her senior, he didn't dare to confirm it, so there was a hint of bewilderment on his face. In Linhai, aside from women with poor spiritual roots and no foundation, all female cultivators with some cultivation level were Bichuan Court disciples. The female cultivator before them was in the early stage of the foundation building realm, so logically speaking, she must be a Bichuan Court disciple. However, Tiange didn't have the slightest symbol of Bichuan Court on her, and they also didn't recognize Xianxia School's uniform. Tiange showed a faint smile, then said to that person, "Excuse me, is this Bichuan Court's shop?" Upon hearing her question, the shop assistant promptly nodded, then asked, "Senior, may I ask who you are?" Tiange's expression was calm. "I'm a Kunwo cultivator who came here by accident. I especially came to ask to see the manager of Bichuan Court." Upon hearing what she said, the other shop assistants stopped what they were doing and stared at her. It had been a long time since cultivators from other places came to Linhai, let alone a foundation-building cultivator who could be considered a high-level cultivator to them. Upon hearing what she said, the shop assistant who received her hurriedly said, "I see. Senior, please wait here for a moment. I'll immediately ask the manager to come out and see you." Tiange nodded with a smile. "Thank you." Perhaps it was because her cultivation level was high enough, or perhaps it was because her attitude was amiable, but after the shop assistant asked her to take a seat, he dashed into the back hall. Before long, a middle-aged man in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm hurriedly came out behind the shop assistant. The middle-aged man immediately saw Tiange sitting on the guest seat. He immediately walked towards her and said respectfully, "I'm Luo Qianshan, manager of Bichuan Water Pavilion. Greetings to Senior." Tiange stood up and saluted him back. "Manager Luo doesn't need to be too polite. My name is Yi Xiaotian, and I'm a cultivator from Kunwo. I came here by accident and heard that your school has a transporting formation to leave, so I came to see you." Manager Luo had already learned the reason from the shop assistant. Originally, this wasn't a big deal. Although Linhai was isolated from the rest of the world, from time to time, foreign cultivators still came here by accident through various methods. Generally speaking, they just needed to report it to the school. Whether they could leave or not depended on whether the school was willing to lend them the transporting formation. However, the person in front of him wasn't only a female cultivator, but also a foundation-building cultivator. In a small place like Linhai, a foundation-building cultivator was already a high-level cultivator, so he didn't dare to neglect her. "So it's Senior Yi." Manager Luo still had a respectful and courteous attitude. "This is a big deal. Junior will definitely report it to the seniors of our school as soon as possible. Senior Yi, please come inside and sit for a moment." Tiange nodded with a smile. "Alright, sorry for troubling you." Luo Qianshan had a very good impression of her gentle and courteous manner, so he immediately respectfully invited Tiange into the inner room to serve her tea. "Senior Yi." After instructing his subordinate to report to the school, Luo Qianshan sat on the side and said, "It's been a long time since there were foreign cultivators in Linhai. May I ask why Senior came to Linhai?" Tiange smiled. Apparently, Luo Qianshan came to inquire about her background, but that wasn't a big deal. Linhai was Bishuan Court's domain, so a foreign cultivator suddenly came and wanted to borrow the transporting formation. They naturally had to inquire about it. About this? To be honest, I'm also not very clear. She had already thought of an excuse for this. I originally went to a secret place to look for some fated chances, but I don't know what happened, but that secret place suddenly collapsed. Afterward, I discovered I was in Linhai. I see. Luo Qianshan couldn't tell whether what she said was true or false. He only felt that Mo Tiange looked calm and didn't have any suspicious points. Judging from Senior Ye's bearing, you don't seem to be an individual cultivator. May I know which famous cultivation group in Kunwu are you? That's easy. Mo Tiange smiled faintly. I'm a disciple of Xianxia School in Western Kunwu. Xianxia School? Luo Qianshan was horrified. He wasn't a small cultivator from one of those cultivation clans. As the manager of Bishuan Court's shop, he could come into contact with some of Bishuan Court's affairs, so he knew a lot more than them. Xianxia School was the second largest cultivation group in the Celestial Pole. Although Bishuan Court was very powerful in Linhai, it could only be considered a small cultivation group in Kunwu. It couldn't compare to a large cultivation group like Xianxia School at all. Upon hearing Mo Tiange say she was a cultivator from Xianxia School, Luo Qianshan's gaze suddenly changed. He was a bit frightened. Senior Yi is actually a senior from Xianxia School. I'm truly sorry for not recognizing you. Don't mention it. Mo Tiange waved her hand. I'm just an ordinary cultivator from Xianxia School. I really can't afford to receive such a big greeting from Manager Luo. Although Mo Tiange said that, Luo Qianshan didn't dare to slight her in the slightest. His tone was polite and his attitude was respectful. Especially when he saw that Mo Tiange didn't try to hide anything and answered his questions frankly, he didn't have any doubts about her at all. Before long, the shop assistant who went to deliver the news came back and reported. As expected, the manager of Bishuan Court was willing to see her. Mo Tiange secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Up until now, there hadn't been any abnormalities. She hoped the manager of Bishuan Court could smoothly lend her the transporting formation. Chapter 193. When Mo Tiange walked out of Bisui Pavilion, a carriage was already waiting outside. Once Mo Tiange got on the carriage, Luo Qianshan respectfully saw her off. Senior Yi, a senior from my group is already waiting for you at the gate. Senior only needs to go, someone will receive you. In the car, Mo Tiange thanked him. Thank you, Manager Luo. Thank you. Luo Qianshan hastily returned her greeting. Soon after, the coachman cracked his whip, causing the horses to neigh and the carriage to move. Mo Tiange, who was inside the carriage, let down the curtain. She took advantage of the time the carriage was moving to enter a meditative state. She didn't bother to remember the route the carriage took. Up until now, Bishuan Court didn't seem to have malicious intentions towards her. If they did, there was absolutely no need for them to send a carriage to pick her up. Aside from expressing caution, this kind of secular method had no other use. After she entered a meditative state, about an hour passed by quickly and the carriage stopped. The coachman, who was also an aura-refining cultivator, said respectfully from outside, Senior Yi, our group has arrived. Please get off the carriage. Mo Tiange opened her eyes. At that moment, someone had already lifted the curtain. Senior, please get off the carriage. It was a handsome youngster with a respectful attitude. Judging from his clothes, he seemed to be a part-time disciple, just like the coachman. Once Mo Tiange got off the carriage, she immediately saw the jade steps, the lofty monastery gate, and the two female aura-refining cultivators waiting on the side. These two female aura-refining cultivators were different from the coachman and the youngster who lifted the curtain. Their cultivation levels were relatively high. One was in the 7th layer of the aura-refining realm, while the other was in the 8th layer. They didn't have the slightest bit of humility, and their clothes were relatively gorgeous with the same group's emblem on their sleeves and lapels. Mo Tiange noticed that the clothes of these two female cultivators were very similar to Yen Ruoshu's group of 3 whom she met in Ziwei's Immortal's cave. Their emblems were also the same. Upon seeing her getting off the carriage, the two female cultivators walked towards her with smiles on their faces. Are you Senior Yi? We're Bichuan Court's guest receiving disciples. Greetings to Senior Yi. Since she was in Bichuan Court's territory, Mo Tiange politely returned their greetings. Mrs., you're too polite. I'm Yi Xiaotian. She keenly noticed that the two female cultivators seemed to be evaluating her. They looked at her and finally smiled at each other as if they were satisfied. One of them said, We've already reported Senior Ye's origin to the sect's elders. The sect leader heard that there's another guest from outside, and it's a foundation-building senior, so he specifically ordered us to welcome Senior here. Oh. Mo Tiange raised her brows, feeling a bit surprised. Another person continued, The sect master is waiting for Senior. Please follow us. Your sect head wants to see me? Mo Tiange was astonished. Right now, she was suppressing her cultivation level to the early stage of the foundation-building realm. With the spirit-concealing pendants effect, core formation cultivators wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities, so she wasn't afraid the sect head of Bichuan Court would discover anything. However, she was a foreign cultivator and her cultivation level was only in the early stage of the foundation-building realm. Was it necessary for the sect leader to meet her? On second thought, she felt she didn't need to be nervous. Maybe it was because foreign cultivators were too rare and she was a female cultivator, so the sect head of Bichuan Court was interested in her. Exactly. After the female cultivator finished speaking, she turned around and cast a glance at the youngster who lifted the curtain. Go inform the sect head that our honored guest has arrived. Mo Tiange discovered that both the coachman and the youngster were extremely respectful in front of these two female cultivators. If this was Kunwu, she'd only think they didn't dare to show the slightest bit of disrespect because these two female cultivators had relatively high statuses. However, she'd already inquired about Bichuan Court and learned that female cultivators were respected. She also noticed that in Bichuan Court, those who did chores and had low statuses were all male cultivators. After instructing the youngster to go inform the sect head of Bichuan Court, the two female cultivators politely led the way. Senior Yi, please. Mo Tiange nodded. Thank you for your trouble. She then followed the two of them up the stairs. Bichuan Court's monastery wasn't any different from the cultivation groups in Kunwu. Its spirit veins were also very ordinary. Of course, this was also because Mo Tiange's horizons were much higher now. Mount Taikong was a top-notch spiritual mountain while Bichuan Court was only located in a remote corner. How could it compare to Kunwu's top-notch spirit veins? However, although Bichuan Court's imposing manner was lacking, it was very exquisite. Once they climbed the jade steps and entered the monastery, they saw pavilions, terraces, mansions, ponds, and waterside pavilions. All of them were exquisite, elegant, and beautiful. Presumably, women were meticulous and dexterous, so their arrangements were better than men's. Mo Tiange followed the two female cultivators and walked for about the time it took to drink a cup of tea before they arrived at a main hall. The two female cultivators guarding the door were also in the 8th or 9th layer. Upon seeing Mo Tiange and Mo Tiange walking over, they bowed and said, Junior Martial Sisters, you've worked hard. Is this Senior Yi? Mo Tiange raised her hand. Yes. The two of them smiled and said, Senior Yi, the sect head is already waiting. Please come in. Mo Tiange nodded to express her thanks, then stepped into the main hall. However, the moment she stepped into the main hall, Mo Tiange was stunned. It wasn't because there was anything unusual about this main hall, but because there was only a middle-stage foundation-building female cultivator sitting on the main seat. This female cultivator was about 27 or 28 years old. She wore gorgeous clothes and looked very charming. At first glance, she could tell she was a woman who was good at dancing. Mo Tiange was hesitant. The Bichuan Court disciple who led her in said their sect head was waiting here, but why was there only this foundation-building female cultivator? For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the moment this female cultivator saw her, she stood up first, then said with a smile, Are you fellow Daoist Yi? Although Mo Tiange was hesitant, she didn't show it on her face. She just raised her hand to greet her. Yes, I'm Yi Xiaotian. Greetings to fellow Daoist. Upon hearing her name, the female cultivator also returned her greeting, then said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist, ye is too polite. My name is Wei Haolan, and I'm the sect head of Bishuan Court." "You're the sect head of Bishuan Court?" Mo Tiange blurted out in surprise. She originally thought the sect head would be a core formation cultivator, so she was puzzled as to why a core formation cultivator wanted to see her. She never expected it to be a foundation-building cultivator. Once she said that, Mo Tiange immediately realized she was being a bit rude, so she hastily greeted her again. "I'm sorry, Sect Head Wei. I was being rude." Wei Haolan didn't seem to mind. She showed a faint smile, then stepped forward to help Mo Tiange up. "I heard from my disciples that fellow Daoist Yi is a brilliant disciple of Xianxia School, a large cultivation group in the Celestial Pole. Presumably, your vision is also extraordinary. You never expected Bishuan Court would actually have a foundation-building disciple as the sect head, right? This can't be considered rude at all." This sect head Wei was gentle and amiable. Mo Tiange secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She was originally worried Bishuan Court was too powerful and was used to being overbearing, but it seemed this sect head Wei was also a smart person. She treated guests with enough respect. After the two of them exchanged some pleasantries, Mo Tiange finally sat down in the guest seat. Soon after, an attendant served them tea. It was still a low-priced male cultivator. Apparently, in this Bishuan Court, women were indeed superior to men. Mo Tiange thought to herself. She was used to seeing those people in Kunwu always treating female cultivators as human furnaces, so she was truly carefree in Bishuan Court. "Fellow Daoist Yi." Wei Haolan symbolically took a sip of tea, then said to Mo Tiange with a smile, "Our Linhai town hasn't had any foreign cultivators for many years. May I know what kind of fortuitous encounter fellow Daoist Yi had? How did you come to Linhai town?" Upon hearing the question, Mo Tiange put down her teacup, then answered, "To be honest, Sect Head Wei, several months ago, I was ordered by my master to leave the mountain to travel. I happened to run into several fellow Daoists, so we went to a secret place to look for treasures. Unexpectedly, while we were looking for treasures, that secret place suddenly collapsed. I don't know what happened, but when I woke up, I was already in Linhai." Wei Haolan was puzzled. "Is that so?" "Correct. As for how I came here, even I don't know, so I don't know where to start." Upon seeing Mo Tiange's bewildered expression, Wei Haolan smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist Yi, it's already very fortunate that you were able to preserve your life and didn't suffer any serious injuries. Our Linhai is isolated from the rest of the world. In the past few years, foreign cultivators occasionally came here, but many of them suffered serious injuries and even lost their lives. There are all kinds of strange things in this world. We're still just beginners on the path to immortality, so there are some things we still can't understand." "That's right." Mo Tiange carefully thought about why she came to Linhai. The scenery of the land of Hiding Dragon changed every year. According to her speculation, there was probably some kind of secret technique hidden there. Every year, it would attract a place to move to the land of Hiding Dragon, and the next year, it would change again. This time, it was very coincidental that she was transferred to Linhai. After putting this matter aside, Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then simply asked frankly, "Sect Head Wei, I heard in Linhai town, only your group has a transporting formation that connects to the outside world. Is that true?" Wei Haolan nodded. Mo Tiange was delighted. She stood up and raised her hand. "That being the case, I'd like to borrow your group's transporting formation. Is that possible?" She paused for a moment, then added, "Of course, I'll give you some property as a fee for using the transporting formation." Wei Haolan didn't answer right away. Instead, she leisurely took a sip of tea, then said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist, you doesn't need to be so polite. This matter of borrowing the transporting formation can be discussed." Although she said it could be discussed, Wei Haolan didn't continue. Instead, she picked up her teacup and continued to slowly drink her tea. Several years ago, Mo Tiange took over Shangqing Palace's affairs, so she had a general understanding of these ways of communication. Seeing Wei Haolan's attitude, she had a rough idea of what to do. It seemed this Wei Haolan was also quite skillful. She treated people kindly, but when it came to scheming, she wasn't polite at all. She didn't speak now because she had the transporting formation, so the initiative was always in her hands. If Tiange wanted to borrow the transporting formation, she had to state her own conditions. Wei Haolan wouldn't agree until she was satisfied. Tiange wasn't in a hurry. She imitated Wei Haolan and slowly drank her tea for a while before she put down the teacup and said faintly, "Sect head Wei, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. How about this? If your group is willing to lend me the transporting formation, I'll give you 1,000 spirit stones. What do you think?" 4 ordinary foundation building cultivators, 1,000 spirit stones was a huge sum. It was very difficult for individual cultivators to come up with this kind of money. Even for cultivation group disciples, if they weren't good at saving money, they also wouldn't be able to come up with that kind of money. After all, foundation building cultivators had a lot of income, but their expenses were also high. However, Wei Haolan only raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Yi, you're worthy of being a cultivator from a big cultivation group. I'm not even willing to part with 1,000 spirit stones." Although that was what she said, Tiange could also hear that she wasn't very satisfied. She pondered for a while then said, 1,500 spirit stones. Although the transporting formation consumed a lot of spirit stones, it usually only required several mid-grade spirit stones to be used each time. In other words, several hundred spirit stones were enough. With 1,500 spirit stones, she could earn at least 1,000 spirit stones. Nevertheless, Wei Haolan still shook her head and didn't say anything. Obviously, she wasn't very satisfied with this price. Chapter 194. How could Tiange not know Wei Haolan was raising the price? However, they had the transporting formation, so they had nothing to fear. She stared at Wei Haolan and said the next price, 2,000 spirit stones. Wei Haolan's gaze finally wavered, but she didn't agree immediately. Instead, she smiled at Tiange and praised her. "Fellow Daoist Yi is really generous. 2,000 spirit stones to borrow the transporting formation is really generous." Tiange looked at her and said faintly, "But sect head Wei doesn't like it, right?" Wei Haolan saw Tiange's displeasure, but she still said with a smile, "Of course not. Although I'm the sect head, Wuxia Court is only a small cultivation group. To be honest, I can't afford 2,000 spirit stones. It's just that this transaction isn't very cost-effective for the cultivation group." Tiange raised her eyebrows. "Does sect head Wei think it's cost-effective for me to hand over all my belongings in exchange for the transporting formation? I don't dare." Wei Haolan still had a faint smile on her face. She said unhurriedly, "However, as a disciple of a large cultivation group, fellow Daoist, you must be very wealthy. A small cultivation group like ours can't compare to you. 2,000 spirit stones. I'm afraid fellow Daoist Yi doesn't really care." For elite disciples of large cultivation groups like her, 2,000 spirit stones indeed wasn't much. Not to mention she was now Lord Daoist Jinghe's advanced inner disciple, so her rations weren't inferior to core formation cultivators. Even Luo Fengxue, who was a core formation cultivator's favorite disciple, could afford several thousand spirit stones. Wei Haolan was worthy of being the head of a cultivation group. Although Wuxia Court wasn't a large cultivation group, she knew roughly how much the disciples of large cultivation groups had. Tiange regretted confessing her cultivation group, but on second thought, if she didn't have Xianqing School as her backer, she might have extorted even more. "Sect leader Wei." She pondered for a moment then said straightforwardly, "We're not merchants, so haggling over the price is really boring. You should just give me a price. As long as I can afford it, I won't waste my breath." But Wei Haolan seemed to be waiting for her to say that. She clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Yi, you're a straightforward person. That being the case, I won't refuse anymore." Wei Haolan paused for a moment, but she didn't directly state a price. Instead, she said slowly, "Does fellow Daoist Yi know what kind of situation Wuxia Court is in Linhai?" Tiange nodded. Since I arrived here, I've gained a rough understanding of the situation. Your school is the only cultivation group in Linhai, and it also controls the only transporting formation leading to the outside world. It can be said that your school is the most powerful. That's right, one sect dominates. Wei Haolan had a proud expression on her face as she said those words. However, after saying those words, she sighed. However, there are many hidden dangers behind the dominance of a single sect. Mo Tiange was bewildered. Your group has a core formation cultivator overseeing things, there aren't any powerful enemies on your side, and all the cultivators in Linhai are under your group's control. Where would the hidden danger come from? Wei Haolan showed a bitter smile. Fellow Daoist Yi, you might not know this, but although Bishuan Court's development is smooth, Linhai's only so big. Our spirit veins can't be considered top-notch, and we're even more lacking in resources. Even if we don't have any strong enemies, it'll still be very difficult for us to grow. Mo Tiange was also aware of this. Zhengfa sect, one of the 7 great cultivation groups, was also facing this problem. The size of a sect's territory was the fundamental problem that restricted its development. Aside from moving, there was no other way to solve this problem. But on the other hand, with Linhai's special terrain, Bishuan Court basically didn't have to worry about anything if it didn't vainly try to grow. They had exclusive access to resources, and the whole of Linhai was their world. Even though their population was small, it was still possible for them to train a few cultivators. Accepting disciples was easy, so all the cultivators in Linhai racked their brains to enter Bishuan Court. The same was true for male cultivators. With manpower and wealth, as long as they didn't make any stupid moves, the group would be able to develop steadily. In other words, given the current scale of the group, being the sect head of Bishuan Court was the best choice. Seeing as Mo Tiange didn't respond, Wei Haolan could only continue to say, of course, in the beginning, Bishuan Court was nothing more than a shelter for a group of women who had a hard life, given by the sect's founder. We didn't want to be like those big cultivation groups who wanted to develop their influence and train many high-level disciples. But in any case, if Bishuan Court wants to pass on its legacy, some things are indispensable. Mo Tiange nodded. So, what does sect head Wei want from me? Mo Tiange wasn't an idiot. Wei Haolan's words definitely meant she wanted to exchange some resources from her, perhaps medicinal pills or magic tools. Seeing as Mo Tiange understood what she meant, Wei Haolan didn't beat around the bush and said bluntly, fellow Daoist Yi came from Kunwu. Kunwu is rich in cultivation resources, so presumably, fellow Daoist Yi doesn't lack medicinal pills and materials. Mo Tiange held the teacup and smiled. I beg to differ, sect head Wei. There's no cultivator who doesn't lack medicinal pills and materials. The current era isn't like the distant past era where spiritual objects were everywhere. Although Kunwu is rich in resources, it's still a lot more people. That may be the case, but it's much better than Linhai. Wei Haolan didn't feel displeased. She looked at Mo Tiange and said with a stern expression, fellow Daoist Yi, although we don't have many spirit stones, we can still find spirit stone veins in Linhai. However, Linhai and Kunwu have been separated for too long. Although we often send disciples to study outside, our pill concocting and tool refining skills have been declining and we're short of resources. If fellow Daoist Yi wants to borrow the transporting formation, you can use medicinal pills and materials to exchange for them. You can also use pill concocting and tool refining skills. At this point, Wei Haolan finally stated her real price. After revealing her trump card, she stared at Mo Tiange. Although the initiative was in her hands, she also urgently needed these things. Upon hearing what Wei Haolan said, Mo Tiange put down her teacup and tapped her fingers on the table as if she was thinking. Upon seeing her like this, Wei Haolan asked again, fellow Daoist Yi, these are still within your means, right? Mo Tiange glanced at her then nodded. Sect head Wei, I like to be frank, so I'll be frank with you. I don't have many tool refining materials on me, so I'm afraid I can't exchange them with you. My tool refining skills are also mediocre, so I can't teach you anything. But as for medicinal pills, I do have some on me. I also found some spiritual plants during this trip, and I can also take out some common pill recipes. I just don't know if sect head Wei will be satisfied with them. Wei Haolan looked delighted. It seems fellow Daoist Yi is proficient in pill concocting. To be honest, we can buy common spiritual plants and pill recipes, but the art of pill concocting really isn't easy to learn. If fellow Daoist Yi can teach our disciples how to concoct medicinal pills, I'll save you the transporting formation fee. In addition, if fellow Daoist Yi has high-grade medicinal pills, we're willing to exchange them with specialties from the Eastern Sea. Is that so? Mo Tiange was somewhat tempted. I do have some pill concocting skills, but I don't know if sect head Wei will be satisfied with them. Wei Haolan smiled. Whether you're satisfied or not, you'll know once you try. Mo Tiange pondered for a while then nodded. All right. Now that they'd more or less reached an agreement, Mo Tiange followed Wei Haolan to Bishuan Court's concocting room. Although Bishuan Court was a small cultivation group, its concocting room wasn't small. It occupied an entire main hall. Upon entering the concocting building, Mo Tiange saw about 7 or 8 pill furnaces inside. In front of each pill furnace were several busy female disciples, and there were also some low-level male cultivators assisting them. Mo Tiange swept her gaze over them. These female disciples were all in the aura refining realm, but their pill concocting techniques seemed very unskilled. Even the better ones could barely concoct early-stage foundation-building medicinal pills like soul-strengthening pills. Mo Tiange shook her head inwardly. No wonder Wei Haolan was in such a hurry. This kind of pill concocting level simply wasn't good enough for a cultivation group with more than 1,000 disciples. She reckoned the failure rate of concocting foundation-building pills was very high, and soul-strengthening pills were the only foundation-building pills. It wasn't easy for disciples to build their foundation, and cultivating after they built their foundation was even harder. Once the two of them entered the concocting room, a disciple immediately came to greet them. Sect head. Wei Haolan nodded then asked, "Is your martial uncle Xia here?" The disciple answered, "Sect head, martial uncle Xia is concocting pills in the inner room." "Has it started?" "Not yet." After thinking for a moment, the disciple added, "If sect head wants to see martial uncle Xia, it's not too late if you go now. Martial uncle Xia is heating up the furnace. She'll be concocting pills in a moment." Wei Haolan nodded then said to Mo Tiange, "Fellow Daoist Yi, my junior martial sister Xiaqing is the #1 expert in concocting pills in the group. She's currently concocting a furnace of soul-solidifying pills. Let's go and take a look." Soul-solidifying pills were basic medicinal pills taken by core formation cultivators. Based on what Wei Haolan said, this Xiaqing should be a foundation-building female cultivator, so it wasn't easy for her to concoct medicinal pills for the core formation realm. Apparently, Mo Tiange still underestimated Bishuan Court. A concocting master at this level should be able to support a small or medium-sized cultivation group like Bishuan Court. However, Mo Tiange's pill concocting skills were no longer the same as before. Now that she had a lot of spiritual plants in her virtual sky world to waste, her pill concocting skills also improved in a straight line. For her, concocting soul-solidifying pills was very easy. The two of them walked through the hall and entered a separate concocting room. This concocting room was very spacious. There was only one huge concocting furnace inside, but there were no fewer aura refining cultivators inside than the ones in the hall outside. Mo Tiange discovered that this concocting furnace wasn't like the ones in the hall outside, which were operated by the disciples concocting pills using their Dantian real fire. Instead, this furnace used earthly fire as its concocting fire, and the earthly fire was very pure. As they walked further inside, they saw a female cultivator with slightly messy hair standing behind the huge concocting furnace. She was muttering to herself as she calculated the amount of materials. She looked so focused that it was as if she wouldn't raise her head even if the sky collapsed. Mo Tiange was a bit surprised. This female cultivator was actually in the foundation building realm. Was she Wei Haolan's junior martial sister Xiaqing? Her current appearance indeed resembled a pill concocting maniac. She didn't even raise her head to look at the two foundation building cultivators who came in. "Fellow Daoist Yi, Wei Haolan said to Imo Tiange with a helpless expression. This is my junior martial sister Xiaqing. Once she starts concocting medicinal pills, she doesn't care about the heavens or the earth. Please don't take offense. Imo Tiange showed a faint smile. On the contrary, I think your junior martial sister is very respectable. Those who concentrate wholeheartedly on one thing are all very respectable. Compared to those ignorant female cultivators in Kunwu who only knew how to show off their clothes and jewelry, Imo Tiange liked the female cultivators in Bichuan court much more. Wei Haolan, for example, was smart and capable, planning for the future of her group. Xiaqing, on the other hand, was wholeheartedly devoted to concocting medicinal pills and even forgot to take care of herself. Imo Tiange had seen too many female cultivators who didn't want to make progress. She often felt sorry for their misfortune but also angry at their lack of ambition. Why did female cultivators have such a low status in the cultivation world? Sometimes, status wasn't given by others, it was earned by oneself. If you didn't know how to work hard, didn't know how to fight for it, and just because others gave you a certain position, you cried and wiped the earth, was that useful? Didn't you see that in this world, there were still female cultivators who formed their nascent souls and held their own? Therefore, it wasn't that female cultivators had a low status. It was just that there were too few high-level female cultivators. Chapter 195. Junior Martial Sister Xia. Wei Haolan shouted. The alchemist named Xiaqing just frowned and waved her hand impatiently. Then, she continued to mutter her calculations. Wei Haolan once again felt helpless. She said to Imo Tiange, "Fellow Daoist Yi, do you mind waiting for a moment? I really can't do anything to her." Imo Tiange chuckled. Concoctions masters all have some eccentricities. I'm not in a hurry. Sect head Wei, please do as you please. Wei Haolan smiled apologetically and ordered a disciple to prepare a seat. The two of them sat and chatted for a while before Xiaqing suddenly stood up and shouted, "All right, start the furnace and start concocting pills." Junior Martial Sister Xia. Wei Haolan seized this opportunity and shouted again. Xiaqing finally heard her this time. Scratching her head, she turned around and asked, "Oh, Senior Martial Sister Sect Head, what's the matter?" Her tone sounded like she was swatting away a fly. Imo Tiange couldn't help but chuckle. In fact, this Xiaqing was quite delicate and pretty. If she could tidy herself up, she could also be considered elegant and pleasant. However, she was so slovenly. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were crooked. If it weren't for her temperament as an immortal cultivator, she would have been regarded as a beggar. Wei Haolan pulled Imo Tiange over. "Let me introduce you. This is a cultivator from Xianxing School in Kunwu, fellow Daoist Yi Xiaotian." Xiaqing frowned. She wasn't curious about Imo Tiange's identity at all, so she just casually raised her hand and said, "Greetings, fellow Daoist Yi." Without waiting for Imo Tiange to return the greeting, Imo Tiange immediately asked Wei Haolan, "I'm busy here. Why did you bring people here?" Imo Tiange's words were stuck in her throat, so she could only listen to what Wei Haolan had to say. Wei Haolan said, "Didn't you say there's no one to compare notes with in alchemy? Fellow Daoist Yi is proficient in the art of pill concocting, so I specially invited her to discuss pill concocting techniques with you." Upon hearing what Imo Tiange said, Xiaqing's attitude immediately changed. She pulled Imo Tiange's hand incomparably affectionately. "Fellow Daoist Yi, do you know how to concoct medicinal pills?" Imo Tiange lowered her head to look at her hands, which had already turned gray from being stained by something. She resisted the urge to pull her hand back and answered flatly, "I know a little." "Just a little?" Xiaqing asked. "Do you know how to refine soul-solidifying pills? Did he know how to refine the heart-shielding powder? Where were the beauty pills? Or the dustless pill? Some of them." Imo Tiange discreetly pulled back her sleeves and shook them. "If I have the materials, I can concoct them, but the success rate isn't very high." "Wow, you even know how to refine pills? Not bad." Xiaqing continued to ask. "The success rate isn't very high, but how high is it? 30%? 40%? About 50%. If I'm in a good state, I can go up to 60%. With a success rate of 50% to 60%, one could already be considered a master apothecary. In the beginning, Immortal wasn't very talented in pill concocting, but she had piles of spiritual plants to squander, so her success rate slowly increased. Therefore, she came to a conclusion. There was no such thing as talent. If there were countless spiritual herbs to refine, most people could become pill refinement masters. 60%. Xiaqing shouted. Even Wei Haolan's eyes lit up. Come on. Xiaqing immediately pulled Mo Tianga's sleeve towards the concocting furnace. I have ready-made materials here. Try concocting a soul-solidifying pill. Ah. Mo Tianga withdrew her sleeve from Xiaqing's hand and looked at Wei Haolan. Fellow Daoist Wei, this. Wei Haolan was also very excited when she heard that Mo Tianga's success rate could reach up to 60%. She hastily said, Fellow Daoist Yi, just try it. If you succeed, we'll lend you our transporting formation for free as long as you teach junior martial sister Xia your pill concocting secrets. Mo Tianga nodded. Concoctions masters rarely taught their pill concocting secrets to others, but Mo Tianga didn't rely on pill concocting to earn spirit stones, so she didn't have to worry about this. Besides, her pill concocting secrets were just some experiences she summarized after concocting for a long time. There was nothing special about them. Even if she taught them to Xiaqing, it would only save her some time. In any case, she found Xiaqing pleasing to the eye, so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable teaching her. Seeing that Mo Tianga agreed, Xiaqing immediately waved her hand. Bring the materials. Yes, the numerous aura refining disciples answered and brought the spiritual plants they were responsible for. Mo Tianga skimmed through them. The materials were very ordinary. Among them, the main ingredients of soul-solidifying pill, purple slough grass and snowlingji mushroom were only 500 years old. As for the other ingredients, needless to say, some of them were only about 100 years old. In fact, this wasn't a big deal. Soul-solidifying pill was a basic medicinal pill for core formation cultivators, so it only had two requirements for the materials. Purple slough grass and snowlingji mushroom had to be more than 500 years old, and there weren't many requirements for the other ingredients. However, the older the spiritual plant, the better the medicinal pill would be. With the materials in front of her, the efficacy of this soul-solidifying pill could only be said to be SOSO. In fact, she was the only one who thought this way. In this world, spiritual plants that were more than 1,000 years old were already hard to come by. Even core formation cultivators generally only used spiritual plants that were more than 500 years old. Who would be like her, who had a private medicinal garden where they could concoct medicinal pills as they pleased? Furthermore, almost all the spiritual plants were more than 1,000 years old. Wei Haolan, who keenly noticed Mo Tianga's slight frown, looked at the materials and asked, Fellow Daoist Yi, is there a problem with these spiritual plants? It's nothing. Mo Tianga gently shook her head. After examining all the spiritual plants, she signaled an aura refining disciple to bring over an empty tray, put a clean cotton cloth on it, and began to take the amount she needed. She simply weighed them with her hand, then directly put them on the cotton cloth. She didn't need to weigh them at all. Very soon, she finished taking several dozen portions of materials. After wiping her hands clean, she said to the aura refining disciple holding the tray, Put them over there. Be careful not to mix them together. The aura refining disciple complied and cautiously brought the tray over. Xiaqing came over, exhaled, and praised, Fellow Daoist Yi, let's not talk about other things, but you actually didn't need to calculate or weigh them, yet you were able to divide the amount you needed. This is something I can't do. Amazing. Mo Tianga just smiled. After concocting a lot of medicinal pills, I'll have an idea. This was the truth. There was nothing fancy about it. But then again, there were very few people like her who didn't need to worry about materials at all, so there were also very few people who could do this. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't any. Almost all great concoctions masters in Kunwu could do this, let alone great concoctions masters. They were either cultivated by cultivation groups or had great cultivation clans as their backing. From this point of view, concocting was achieved by piling up spiritual plants, but it could also be said that it was achieved by piling up spirit stones. Unfortunately, Bishuan Court was located in Linhai. Even though there was a transporting formation connecting it to Kunwo, they still weren't rich enough to buy a pile of materials and waste them. Wei Haolan's face was also filled with admiration. She thought to herself, Xianxia School isn't a pill-concocting cultivation group, and this fellow Daoist Yi also doesn't look very old, but she actually has such superb concocting skills. It's clear that Kunwu is really full of talented people. It's worthy of being the celestial pole's cultivation holy land. After she finished preparing the materials, Tiange stared at the already heated pill furnace. She muttered to herself for a while, then reached out to feel the temperature of the earth fire and the thickness of the pill furnace. This pill furnace was much thicker than the purple wooden tripod she used, and the earth fire was slightly inferior, so she had to start the furnace a bit later. She would have to constantly use her divine sense to monitor the temperature. After she finished checking everything, she cleaned her hands and said, "Open the furnace." Xia Qing, who had been impatient for a long time, hastily waved her hands. "Open the furnace! Open the furnace!" With a great aunt urging them from behind, these aura-refining disciples didn't dare to be negligent. They hastily arranged the materials, poured the clear spring water, then worked together to lift the furnace lid. Frankly speaking, this pill furnace was a lot worse than Tiange's purple wooden tripod. After all, the purple wooden tripod was once used by a deification cultivator, so even if it was only once, it still wasn't an ordinary item. This pill furnace was just a magic tool. It couldn't even be considered a magic weapon. This wasn't strange at all. With Bishuan Court scale, they only had 3 core formation cultivators in total, and they weren't good at concocting pills, so it was naturally very difficult for them to have a top-grade pill furnace. However, this pill furnace couldn't be considered too bad. It was worth at least 100 spirit stones, which was much better than the common goods Tiange used in the beginning. After she gave the order to start the furnace, Tiange didn't immediately start concocting pills. Instead, she closed her eyes and meditated. Although the amount had long been divided when she concocted pills, she still had to increase or decrease the amount according to the changes in the furnace fire, so she needed to be completely focused and couldn't be distracted in the slightest. The other 2 foundation-building cultivators and several dozen aura-refining cultivators didn't dare to make any noise. They were all used to seeing Xia Qing concocting pills. With Xia Qing's temper, if anyone dared to make even the slightest noise while she was concocting pills, they would immediately be driven out of the concocting room and demoted to a part-time disciple. The disciples who could stay here were all experienced and knew the rules very well. After she calmed down, the pill furnace was also hot enough. Tiange first mixed the heavenly sunflower powder and purple sloe grass, then threw them into the pill furnace and said, "Close the furnace." The several aura-refining disciples immediately followed her instructions. Tiange closed her eyes and sent a strand of her divine sense into the pill furnace. She sensed the purple sloe grass slowly melting into a pool of purple liquid while the heavenly sunflower powder dissolved into the purple sloe grass liquid. As the temperature of the pill furnace rose, these 2 kinds of materials mixed into one. Gradually, they couldn't be separated from each other anymore and became a new substance. The temperature in the furnace was already boiling. The purple sloe grass liquid quickly evaporated and gradually turned into lumps of wheel-shaped objects. Tiange opened her eyes. "Open the furnace." Xia Qing didn't need to remind them again. The aura-refining disciples moved very quickly and immediately lifted the lid of the pill furnace. This time, Tiange only kept a few kinds of materials and threw most of them inside. Once again, she ordered them to close the pill furnace. She then sat motionlessly as if she was meditating. In the beginning, Xia Qing could still stare at the pill furnace, but she didn't dare to use her divine sense. This was because when concoctions masters concocted pills, their divine senses had to constantly pay attention to the inside of the pill furnace. If they were disturbed by other people's divine senses, they might make mistakes. Xia Qing thought the 2 of them were both in the foundation-building realm, So even if their divine senses were strong and weak, the difference wouldn't be too big, so they would be disturbed. What she didn't know was that Tianga's divine sense couldn't be affected by cultivators in the same realm as her. Because she cultivated the soul-refining art, her divine sense was more tenacious than ordinary cultivators and wouldn't be easily affected. In the end, perhaps because it was time for Xiaqing to concoct pills, Xiaqing couldn't sit still anymore. However, she didn't dare to disturb Tianga, so she stood up and paced left and right, occasionally gesturing at Wei Haolan. Wei Haolan couldn't understand the meaning of her gestures, so she could only nod randomly. Finally, when Xiaqing was about to lose her patience, Tianga opened her eyes and ordered for the third time, "Open the furnace." When the aura-refining cultivators opened the pill furnace, she first poured clear spring water, then put in the remaining spiritual plants. "Okay, cover it. You can rest now." The aura-refining cultivators waiting on the side heaved sighs of relief, but they didn't dare to make any noise. They just retreated and waited quietly. This time, they waited even longer than the last time. Xiaqing couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Daoist, isn't it too long?" This time, Tianga wasn't meditating, but when she heard what Xiaqing said, she just shook her head. "Rest assured." After saying that, she didn't say anything else. Xiaqing paced back and forth anxiously behind her. Tianga calmly stared at the pill furnace, neither too fast nor too slow. Chapter 196. Just as Xiaqing was about to rush over and open the furnace for her, Tianga finally stood up. The timing of opening the pill furnace at the end of alchemy was very particular. If the furnace was opened too early, the pill aura would disperse quickly and the pill would be unstable. Even if the pill was formed, the medicinal efficacy would be reduced. However, if the furnace was opened too late, it wouldn't work either. If too much of the pill fire was sealed in the pill, it would form pill poison and affect the quality of the pill. If the furnace was opened too early or too late, the pills would not be formed. Therefore, a brilliant alchemist must control the opening time of the furnace, not too early nor too late, so that the medicinal effect of the pill would be the highest, and at the same time, try to avoid the pill poison as much as possible. This was not something that was easy to grasp. Even an alchemy grandmaster would make mistakes sometimes. Other than concocting more pills and trying to figure it out, there was no other way. Right at this moment, Tianga was concentrating her senses. All of a sudden, she made her move. A wisp of spiritual aura flew out and rolled up the lid of the pill furnace. Hot steam spread out and a sweet fragrance filled the air. There were a few medicinal pills lying at the bottom of the furnace. The color was clear and each one was plump. Tianga heaved a sigh of relief. Actually, with her skill in alchemy, it was still impossible for her to refine soul-solidifying pills every time she refined them. When she was at her worst, she had refined 10 pills in a single furnace, but not a single one was successfully refined. This was the record she had in the 5 years she had been in seclusion. She didn't expect that all 5 of them would become pills this time. She thought that there would be at least 2 that failed. After that, she didn't need to do anything as Xiaqing had already done it for her. Xiaqing pounced over and grabbed the pills at the bottom of the furnace. She touched and smelled them, and in the end she even scraped off some powder and tasted it. Upon seeing Tianga's appearance, Tian suddenly felt very sympathetic towards the cultivator who would take these medicinal pills in the future. It should be one of the 3 core formation cultivators from Bichuan Court, right? It wasn't easy for them either. The pills they took might have been tasted by someone else. Xiaqing grabbed Tianga and anxiously shouted, "Fellow Daoist, teach me. Teach me. You're too amazing. You refine these pills much better than me. Look at the quality, look at the luster." Ever since she set foot on the path to immortality, Tianga had seen many female cultivators. Among them, there were naive female cultivators like Murong Yen, lively female cultivators like Luo Fengxue, amiable female cultivators like Han Qingyu, cold and arrogant female cultivators like Wei Jiasi, and even many female cultivators who were as vain as mortal women. However, he had never seen someone like Xiaqing who was so focused on one thing and so fanatical that she didn't care about anything else. She considered herself to be a cultivation maniac. Other than cultivating, refining pills, and studying array books, she had no interest in anything else. However, she was still a normal cultivator. She was good at scheming, and scheming. She was definitely not like Xiaqing, who was slovenly and didn't care about the ways of the world, wholeheartedly pursuing the realm of pill concocting. Such a madman was rare even among male cultivators. She had never seen such a person before. Fortunately, Wei Haolan was still present. She pulled Xiaqing back and scolded, "Junior martial sister Xia, aren't you afraid of scaring fellow Daoist Yi? If you want to learn from her, we can just ask her to stay for a few more days. What's the rush?" Right. Xiaqing finally regained her composure. She hastily apologized to Immortal. "Fellow Daoist Yi, I'm sorry. I was too anxious. It's nothing. I understand." Immortal's gaze fell on Wei Haolan. "Sect head Wei, can we conclude the matter we discussed before?" Seeing Xiaqing's reaction, Immortal felt she could take the initiative now. Bichuan Court held the only transporting formation, but she also had the pill concocting technique that Bichuan Court urgently needed. Everyone took what they needed. Wei Haolan's expression calmed down when they talked about proper business. She glanced at Xiaqing and said with a smile, "Of course. Fellow Daoist Yi, how about we go and have a proper talk now?" Immortal understood and nodded. That'd be best. The two of them were about to leave together when Xiaqing pounced on them from behind. "Senior martial sister sect head, you can't take fellow Daoist Yi away." Xiaqing immediately pulled Immortal behind her. Xiaqing glared at Wei Haolan like a hen protecting its chicks. Immortal and Wei Haolan couldn't help but laugh. In the end, Wei Haolan comforted her. "Junior martial sister Xia, rest assured. I'm looking for fellow Daoist Yi because I want her to teach you pill concocting. If you want to learn fellow Daoist Yi's pill concocting technique, don't cause trouble." "Really?" Xiaqing's eyes were filled with suspicion. She looked at Wei Haolan, then turned to look at Immortal. She then shook her head and said, "Senior martial sister sect head, this isn't the first time you've schemed against me." This time, Immortal snickered. Aside from pill concocting, there was nothing else in Xiaqing's eyes. Immortal could also guess Wei Haolan's temperament. Wei Haolan most likely put the sex interests first. In that case, Immortal wouldn't believe Wei Haolan hadn't schemed against Xiaqing. Wei Haolan sighed and said, "Junior martial sister Xia, I schemed against you in the past, but when did I ever not support you in improving your pill concocting technique? Since fellow Daoist Yi is beneficial to your pill concocting technique, I naturally won't let her go." Xiaqing thought for a moment, then nodded hesitantly. "Alright, you're the senior martial sister sect head, so I'll listen to you." She then patted Immortal's shoulder. "Fellow Daoist Yi, don't run away. Let's compare notes first. Whatever you want, I'll ask Martial Uncle Qingyi to give it to you. I guarantee you won't lose anything." Immortal nodded. "Fellow Daoist Xia, rest assured. If your senior martial sister agrees to help me, I'll definitely tell you all my pill concocting tricks." "That's good." Upon hearing what Immortal said, Xiaqing once again said to Wei Haolan in a daze, "Senior martial sister, just agree to fellow Daoist Yi's request. Great concocting masters aren't easy to find. Even if you find one, they never tell anyone about their tricks, so I can't learn them." Wei Haolan felt a headache coming on. She nodded and said, "I understand. You can go back now." Only then did Xiaqing let go of Immortal. Immortal smiled and once again cupped her hands to bid her farewell. With great difficulty, she held back her laughter and left with Wei Haolan. The two of them didn't talk on the way. After walking for a short while, Wei Haolan once again led Immortal back to the main hall. She then ordered the part-time disciples to serve tea again and dismissed everyone else, leaving only the two of them in the hall. "Hem." Wei Haolan coughed, then glanced at Immortal. "Fellow Daoist Yi, since my junior martial sister already said so, I won't hide it anymore. If you want to borrow the transporting formation, that's no problem. As long as you teach my junior martial sister everything you know about concocting pills, you can come and go as you please." This time, Immortal wasn't in a hurry. She slowly sipped her tea then said, "Fellow Daoist Wei, for concocting masters, some things are secrets that can't be passed on. If I teach her everything, shouldn't you add a bit more bargaining chip? This isn't just 2,000 spirit stones. Even if you have spirit stones, you still can't buy the pill concocting secrets." Wei Haolan's expression darkened. "Fellow Daoist Yi, do you want to raise the price?" "I wouldn't dare." Mo Tiange smiled faintly. "I'm not someone who doesn't know how to appreciate favors. We've already reached a preliminary agreement before, but I just want to improve it a bit." Wei Haolan's expression finally became a bit better. "All right. If fellow Daoist Yi has any other requests, please don't hesitate to mention them. As the sect head, I can still make the decision." Sect head Wei is straightforward. Mo Tiange clapped her hands. Wei Haolan forced a smile. "Fellow Daoist Yi, please state your conditions first." Mo Tiange didn't speak right away. Instead, she muttered to herself for a moment. In fact, a small, remote cultivation group like Bishuan Court originally didn't have anything that could make her covet it. She had spirit stones. Although she wasn't as rich as the child of wealth, she had more than ordinary core formation cultivators. There was no need to mention medicinal pills. She had as many as she wanted right now. She also didn't lack magic tools. She even had several magic weapons and 2 late-stage foundation-building puppets. Presumably, there weren't many foundation-building cultivators who had as many treasures as she did. As for materials, this was the Eastern Sea region. Wei Haolan had long said that cultivation resources were scarce here. Sect head Wei, to be honest, I don't need spirit stones or other items. I just need your group to provide me with one thing. Wei Haolan was puzzled. Aside from spirit stones and other items related to cultivation, what else did cultivators need? "Safe," Mo Tiange said faintly. "To tell the truth, sect head Wei, I was transported here together with an enemy. Although we weren't transported together, I'm not sure that person didn't arrive in Linhai." Wei Haolan's expression turned stern. "Enemy? Fellow Daoist Yi, what's the cultivation level of your enemy?" "Right now, he should be in the early stage of the core formation realm. He's a devil cultivator." The early stage of the core formation realm. Wei Haolan muttered to herself for a moment. She didn't ask how Mo Tiange became his enemy. Instead, she said faintly, "If that's the case, fellow Daoist Yi can rest assured. As long as you don't leave Bishuan Court, I can guarantee your safety." "Does that mean sect head Wei can guarantee my safety when I leave Linhai and return to Kunwu?" "As long as fellow Daoist Yi doesn't leave at will, there won't be any problem with us 3 core formation elders here." Mo Tiange smiled. "All right. Since sect head Wei is straightforward, I'll also be straightforward. As long as your group guarantees my safety and allows me to smoothly use the transporting formation to return to Kunwu, I'll teach you everything I know about pill concocting without holding anything back." Hearing those words, Wei Haolan finally revealed a smile. "Very well, then it's decided." Mo Tiange nodded. The two of them clapped their hands to make their vow. Using tea as a substitute for wine, they each drank a cup to signify that they'd reached an agreement. Now that they were done talking about business, Wei Haolan finally seemed to have the mood to relax. She slowly examined Mo Tiange then asked with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Yi's appearance doesn't seem to be due to the effects of look-preserving pills. Presumably, you're also very young, right?" In fact, Mo Tiange had also taken look-preserving pills. However, based on the lifespan of foundation-building cultivators, she hadn't reached the age of aging, so she still had a sense of youthfulness to her. This was something cultivators who had taken look-preserving pills didn't have. Mo Tiange just said faintly, "I only have my current cultivation level because my elders think highly of me." Although she didn't directly admit it, Wei Haolan understood what she meant. "Fellow Daoist Yi's really young and promising. You're worthy of being a disciple of a big cultivation group." Mo Tiange smiled but didn't say anything. If this kind of conversation continued, it would turn into mutual flattery. She wasn't used to that. Since Wei Haolan was the head of a cultivation group, she was naturally shrewd. Upon seeing Mo Tiange's expression, she said, Fellow Daoist, ye must be tired after concocting medicinal pills, right? We're not in a hurry to teach you pill concocting. How about I arrange for fellow Daoist ye to rest first? Tiange was indeed tired, so she took advantage of the situation and said, "All right, I'll have to trouble sect head Wei." Wei Haolan waved her hand, then raised her voice to call out, "Guards!" The two aura-refining female cultivators guarding the door stepped in, then bowed. "Sect head, what are your orders?" Wei Haolan's expression changed when she faced her disciples. She was solemn and imposing. "From today onward, Senior Yi will live in the VIP building. From now on, the two of you will serve Senior Yi. You mustn't neglect her in the slightest, understand?" Upon hearing the sect head's solemn instructions, the two aura-refining cultivators didn't dare to be disrespectful. They hastily bowed and said, "Disciple understands." Wei Haolan nodded. "That'll do. You can go now." "Yes." After answering, the two female cultivators respectfully bowed towards Tiange. "Senior Yi, please follow Junior." Chapter 197. From then on, Tiange stayed at Bichuan Court. Although Wei Haolan was quite scheming, she still treated Tiange quite well. Not only did she send two female cultivators to take care of Tiange's daily chores, but she also gave Tiange a lot of Eastern Sea specialties such as spiritual fruits and other things for her to enjoy. On the second day after Tiange stayed at Bichuan Court's VIP building, there was a continuous stream of guests. Xiaqing was always there. Early in the morning, she dragged Tiange to the concocting room and asked her about pill concocting. When Tiange returned from the concocting room, there were always other guests waiting for her. These guests were all Bichuan Court's foundation building female cultivators. When she asked why, they all said they heard Tiange came from Kunwu, so they wanted to inquire about Kunwu and exchange some things with her. Although Linhai was lacking in cultivation materials, it was still close to the Eastern Sea, so there were some special items in the sea that couldn't be found on land. These things weren't the main raw materials for medicinal pills, but they had special effects. Reportedly, these Bichuan Court disciples only had a few chances to be sent to Kunwu or the Heartland to exchange for materials. Most of them wouldn't get the chance to go to Kunwu in their entire lives, so even if they obtained some materials that were rare for cultivators on land, they could only keep them in their hands. Now that they heard there were fellow cultivators from Kunwu, they all took out the things they had and came to exchange them for medicinal pills, spiritual plants, magic tools, and so on. Tiange didn't lack medicinal pills, and she also had a lot of magic tools. Although she wasn't a bloodthirsty person, many cultivators died around her since the demonic beast riot began. Some were killed by her, and some died because they were unlucky. She obtained a lot of magic tools from those unlucky cultivators, but she usually didn't lack spirit stones, so she didn't exchange them for money. Now, she took them out and exchanged them for some strange materials with these female cultivators. Of course, she wouldn't take out the things she obtained from Yen Ruoshu and the others. Senior Yi. Tiange was cultivating when she suddenly heard a voice outside. She pressed the space between her eyebrows, came out of the virtual sky world, and opened the defensive formation. "What's wrong?" Outside were two female aura-refining cultivators assigned by Wei Haolan to serve her. Their names were Yi Lu and Yi Qiu, and they were a pair of sisters. In Bichuan Court, low-level male cultivators had to do some rather laborious and sporadic work, so this kind of personal work was usually done by the maids. Reportedly, Yi Lu and Yi Qiu didn't have good spiritual roots, so they were taken in as maids in the beginning. Of course, in a cultivation group for female cultivators like Bichuan Court, their status was much higher than that of low-level male cultivators. The two sisters were diligent, and their job was to serve the sect leader. Wei Haolan saw that they were diligent and capable, so she often took care of them. Right now, they were already in the 8th or 9th layer of the aura-refining realm. If they could get their hands on a foundation-building pill, they might be able to reach the sky in a single bound. Tiange recalled the little girl she met in the fishing village. If she was also as hardworking as her path towards immortality might not necessarily be hopeless. Upon hearing Mo Tiange's voice, Yi Lu came in. She bowed respectfully and said, "Senior Yi, the secret treasure pavilion is currently holding an exchange meeting. The sect master heard that Senior Yi often exchanges items with the martial uncles in the sect, so he specially sent someone to invite you." An exchange meeting? Mo Tiange was astonished. She'd naturally heard about the exchange meeting. In the cultivation world, aside from opening shops and setting up stalls, there were also exchanges and auctions. However, the latter was generally used by high-level cultivators. When a cultivator's cultivation level was high, the requirements for the spiritual objects they needed were also high. Ordinary shops were opened by low-level cultivators, so how could they possibly have these things? Therefore, some powerful shops would hold auctions to sell some rare materials at the best price, and the exchange meeting was also born because of this. However, Bichuan Court didn't have that many high-level cultivators, so it could be completely like Xianxia School. They could just set up a group shop and let their disciples buy and sell items. There was no need for an exchange meeting. But on second thought, Mo Tiange remembered that in Linhai, spiritual objects were scarce and high-level cultivators were few, so it wasn't strange for foundation-building cultivators to exchange some rare items among themselves. "Senior Yi?" Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't answer, Yi Lu called her again. Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. "Then lead the way. While you're at it, tell me about this exchange meeting." "Yes." After leading Mo Tiange out of the VIP building, Yi Lu said while leading the way, "This exchange meeting is held every few months. Senior Yi also knows that Linhai doesn't have a lot of cultivation resources, especially medicinal pills. There aren't many good concoctions masters, and we're also short on a lot of spiritual plants. Fortunately, we're near the Eastern Sea, and there are many demonic beasts in the sea. The beast cores of these demonic beasts can be taken directly, beast cores can be taken directly." Mo Tiange interrupted Yi Lu and asked. Yi Lu nodded. "Senior Yi, you don't know. However, taking beast cores requires some special methods to transform the spiritual aura inside. Moreover, different beast cores contain different spiritual auras, so you have to go to the exchange meeting to exchange for the beast cores you need." "I see." Mo Tiange looked pensive. In Kunwu, beast cores had always been used to concoct medicinal pills. Every few decades during the demonic beast riots, the demonic beasts' corpses could be used to refine tools, and beast cores could be used to concoct medicinal pills. Beast cores contained a strange power, and if taken directly, it might lead to cultivation deviation. Even if it didn't happen, the spiritual aura inside the user's body would be contaminated with too many impurities. However, Mo Tiange didn't expect that Linhai actually had a method to transform beast cores directly. This was very valuable. She might be able to comprehend some new methods to use beast cores and better utilize their power. "Senior Yi were here." Yi Lu led her to a building, then pointed at the attic and said, "It's up there. Senior can just go up. Junior's cultivation level isn't high enough, so I can't accompany Senior." Mo Tiange nodded. "Art, thank you. I don't dare." Yi Lu bowed, then went to the side to stand with the disciples guarding the door. Mo Tiange went upstairs by herself. This attic was about the size of a side hall. There was a long table in the middle, and there were already about 20 cultivators sitting around it. All of them were in the foundation building realm, and there were even men and women among them. Mo Tiange was a bit surprised. Ever since she came to Bichuan Court, none of the male cultivators she'd seen were in the foundation building realm. Most of them were low-level cultivators in the second or third layer of the aura refining realm. Among the 20 or so foundation building cultivators in front of her, there were 5 or 6 male cultivators, which was indeed quite a lot. Mo Tiange thought about it. It wasn't like Bichuan Court didn't have male cultivators. She'd also heard that male cultivators with extraordinary aptitudes could be accepted as outer disciples. After they performed dual cultivation with female disciples, they could become official disciples. Seeing that these male cultivators all had relatively intimate female cultivators by their side, they must be these female cultivators' dual cultivation partners, right? Once Mo Tiange came up, Wei Haolan, who was sitting on the host's seat, immediately smiled and personally went to greet her. "Fellow Daoist Yi, you're finally here." Tiange smiled back and even saluted Wei Haolan. She then turned around and saluted everyone. Upon seeing her salute, the cultivators sitting around the long table stood up one after another to return the salute. Wei Haolan pulled Tiange's hand, then returned to the host seat. She directly let Tiange sit next to her, then said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Yi, you don't have to be so reserved. Everyone here today is Bishuan Court's disciples, so this is just an internal exchange gathering." She then turned towards everyone and said, "Fellow disciples, this is fellow Daoist Yi from Kunwu. Fellow Daoist Yi is skilled in pill concocting, so if you have anything you want to exchange for, you must seize this opportunity." Everyone's gazes fell on Tiange. A female cultivator even said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Yi, you mustn't be stingy today. We're all counting on your medicinal pills." During this period of time, Tiange had seen quite a few Bishuan Court female cultivators. Most of them were here, so she recognized about 10 female cultivators present. She smiled and said, "I've never been stingy. If fellow Daoists want to exchange for something, I definitely won't hide anything as long as I have it." Smiles appeared on everyone's faces when they heard what she said. If there was anything special about today's exchange gathering, it had to be fellow Daoist Yi from Kunwu. Everyone else was a Bishuan Court cultivator, so whatever they had was pretty much the same. However, this fellow Daoist Yi was a concocting master. No matter how good beast cores were, they still couldn't compare to medicinal pills of the same rank. At that moment, everyone started to calculate what they had to exchange for medicinal pills and how many they could exchange for. Wei Haolan swept her gaze over everyone, then said, "All right, almost everyone's here. Let's start." Upon hearing her voice, everyone who was still talking quieted down. Wei Haolan said with a faint smile, "According to the rules, we usually take turns from left to right, but today, we have an honored guest, so let's start with the honored guest. Does anyone have any objections?" Most of the people in this exchange gathering came for Tiange, so how could they have any objections? Right now, several dozen pairs of eyes were staring at Tiange. Seeing this situation, Wei Haolan smiled again. "It seems everyone has no objections. It's settled then, let's start with fellow Daoist Yi." She then turned to Tiange and said, "Fellow Daoist Yi, you also know we all want to exchange medicinal pills with you. How many medicinal pills do you have to exchange?" Tiange thought for a moment, then started to take medicinal pills out of her Qiankuan bag. As she put the jade bottles on the table one by one, the cultivator's eyes became brighter and brighter. After taking out about a dozen jade bottles, Tiange stopped. "These are probably all I have. A few days ago, fellow Daoists exchanged for quite a lot, so these were concocted by me on the spot." Even Wei Haolan's eyes brightened when she saw more than a dozen bottles of medicinal pills. Even in Kunwu, medicinal pills weren't cheap. Every year, they sent disciples out to purchase medicinal pills, but there weren't many foundation-building cultivators who used them. "Fellow Daoist Yi," someone couldn't help but ask, "What are these medicinal pills?" Tiange opened the bottles one by one. "These are spirit-cleansing pills. These are restorative panaceas, these are heart-clearing pills, these are look-preserving pills, and the rest are soul-strengthening pills. They're all medicinal pills that foundation-building cultivators can take." She concocted these medicinal pills using the common spiritual plants she bought from Xianqing School's shop. Her previous talk about concocting medicinal pills on the spot was for these cultivators to hear. She was only a foundation-building cultivator. Even if she came from a famous cultivation group and had pill concocting skills, it wouldn't be appropriate for her to take out too many medicinal pills. In particular, the materials she took from her virtual sky world couldn't be taken out to exchange with others. However, this many medicinal pills were already enough for the Bishuan Court disciples trapped in Linhai. "Fellow Daoist Yi, what do you want to exchange for?" Right after she finished speaking, someone immediately called out impatiently and took out a pile of things. "Look, I have all kinds of beast cores and some special spiritual objects from the Eastern Sea. Is there anything you want?" Tiange smiled and said, I'm fine with anything, but I only have these medicinal pills. I'm afraid they're not enough for everyone to exchange for. That's nothing, Wei Haolan interrupted. Fellow Daoist Yi, roughly how many medicinal pills do you have? Mo Tiange made a rough estimate. There were about 10 to 50 medicinal pills in each bottle. About 300. Then let's make an agreement. Martial sisters and junior martial sisters can exchange for 10 medicinal pills at most. What do you think? There were more than 20 people present, so if each person received 10 medicinal pills, they could pretty much exchange all the medicinal pills they had. Everyone had their own calculations and most of them agreed. However, there were also some people who had objections. What if there are more? Wei Haolan smiled and said, if there are more, I'll exchange them on behalf of the group and distribute them to you. What do you think? Chapter 198. After Wei Haolan made her decision, none of the Foundation establishment cultivators had any objections, so the matter was settled. These cultivators' main purpose was naturally to exchange for soul-strengthening pills, which could be used to increase the cultivation of Foundation establishment cultivators. Therefore, Wei Haolan first confirmed the number of soul-strengthening pills and distributed them to the cultivators present. The other restorative spirit pills and purifying spirit pills were also indispensable, but if there weren't enough monster core materials, then they could only give their quota to other cultivators. Originally, look-preserving pills were considered medicinal pills that weren't too popular in shops or in exchange fairs, but Bichuan Court's situation was special. There were about 20 female cultivators present, and they didn't have many look-preserving techniques to begin with, so nearly 30 look-preserving pills were instantly snatched away. There were even 2 female cultivators who started quarreling over a single medicinal pill. Shut up! Wei Haolan shouted when she saw this. Mo Tiange could see that Wei Haolan had quite a bit of prestige in the school. Although there were female cultivators whose cultivation levels weren't inferior to hers, they all quieted down the moment they heard her shout. Wei Haolan furrowed her brows slightly and said, Junior Martial Sisters, if all of you want the beauty pill, then let Junior Martial Sister Xiaqing learn the refining method from fellow Daoist Yi. When the time comes, you can exchange for it yourselves if you want it. This was indeed a solution to the root of the problem. The materials needed to concoct look-preserving pills that could preserve one's appearance for 10 years weren't considered rare. In Kunwu, even aura-refining cultivators who came from a cultivation group or clan could still afford it. If Xiaqing learned the concoction method, Bichuan Court would send people out every year to exchange for the materials. At that time, they could concoct several dozen pills and distribute them among their disciples. After hearing Wei Haolan's words, the 2 female cultivators were finally convinced. Finally, the medicinal pill was exchanged for by the other female cultivator. In the end, Mo Tiange already had a pile of strange materials in her hands. Among them, the most numerous were beast cores, which were colorful and had all kinds of attributes. Sadly, the highest level they had was only a 4th rank Yaodan. After all, a 5th rank Yaodan was equivalent to a completion stage cultivator. They were only at the foundational stage, so killing a 5th rank Yaodan was not easy. After exchanging the last bottle of medicinal pills, Mo Tiange was finally done. Just as she was about to heave a sigh of relief, she suddenly heard hurried footsteps coming from the stairs. It seemed like someone was running up the stairs in a hurry. Wei Haolan frowned in displeasure. Then a white-clothed youth in the early stage of Foundation establishment appeared at the door. I'm sorry. The man stood at the door, his fair face flushed. I'm late. Mo Tiange cast a glance at this person and was secretly shocked. Although she had never seen him before, she recognized him. More than a year ago, inside Wanderer Ziwei's Immortal's cave, the 2 female cultivators, Yun and Lu, were both trapped in the illusory formation. At that time, the one who appeared was exactly this white-robed male cultivator. She remembered that the 2 of them called the Phantom Big Brother Tang. Almost all the female cultivators present had smiles on their faces when they saw this person. Only Wei Haolan's expression was slightly more serious, but she only coughed and said, Junior Martial Brother Tang, why are you so late? Fellow Daoist Ye's medicinal pills have all been exchanged. The male cultivator was dumbfounded. His gaze shifted to Xianxia, who was standing next to Wei Haolan. He was at a loss as to what to do. "Es done changing? Oomph." This time, the one who spoke was one of the male cultivators who rarely spoke before. His tone was ice-cold. "Junior Marshal Brother Tang, you're really leisurely. Sect head said before that the exchange meet must be punctual, but you're already 2 hours late. I have something to do." That person walked towards her in a somewhat awkward manner. Before he could say anything, he saw a female cultivator stand up and say, "Junior Marshal Brother Tang, I exchanged a lot of medicinal pills. I'll give you some." Before Junior Marshal Brother Tang could answer, another female cultivator said, "Senior Marshal Sister Le, you didn't exchange a lot, right? If you give more, you won't have any left." She then turned towards that person and said with a smile, "Big Brother Tang, what were you busy with? There's no need to worry about medicinal pills. I exchanged a few more, so I'll give you half." This female cultivator didn't seem very old, and the way she addressed him was the same as Yun and Lu. Right after she finished speaking, a third female cultivator said, "Junior Marshal Brother Tang, you should exchange with me. Although I don't have enough medicinal pills, I still have a lot of metal element beast cores. Presumably, Junior Marshal Brother Tang needs them." Senior Marshal Sister Yang. The youngest female cultivator raised her eyebrows and shouted, "Who wants your beast cores? We're all here for medicinal pills at today's exchange meet. Big Brother Tang, it's a deal. In a moment, we'll discuss how to exchange medicinal pills." The third female cultivator didn't have a good temper. When she heard this, she flipped her hand, pulled out a crescent moon-shaped blade-shaped magic tool from her waist, and slammed it on the table. "Junior Marshal Sister Hua, it's up to Junior Marshal Brother Tang to decide whether he wants the beast cores or not. You don't need to refuse on his behalf." This, Junior Marshal Sister Hua, was probably used to being arrogant. When she heard this, she didn't say anything else and also pulled out a flying sword from her waist. "Senior Marshal Sister Yang, I'm giving you face. If Big Brother Tang refuses you, you'll lose face." "You, enough." Wei Haolan finally shouted, "There's an honored guest here, so how can you act like this? You don't need to worry about Junior Marshal Brother Tang's medicinal pills. Just now, we used the sect's name to exchange them for Junior Marshal Brother Tang." Senior Marshal Sister Wei. Unexpectedly, Wei Haolan's words didn't have any effect this time. Junior Marshal Sister Hua didn't admit defeat at all. She scowled and said, "You're abusing your position for personal gain. You're using the sect's medicinal pills as a favor." Wei Haolan's expression turned cold when she heard this. At that moment, Senior Marshal Sister Yang interjected, "Senior Marshal Sister Sect Head is the sect head. What's wrong with making this decision? Junior Marshal Sister Hua, aren't you meddling too much? You're not Junior Marshal Brother Tang's dual cultivation wife. You also don't have a share." Once she said that, Junior Marshal Sister Hua flew into a rage. "It's not up to you to decide whether I have a share or not. It's up to Big Brother Tang himself to decide. Right? It's up to him to decide. Junior Marshal Sister Hua, you're so fierce, yet you still want Junior Marshal Brother Tang to take a fancy to you? Don't worry." Tiange watched the lively scene in silence. She originally thought Bichuan Court's female cultivators were much better than the jealous and ostentatious women outside, but it seemed it also depended on who they were. Today really broadened her horizons. There were actually people who quarreled like this because of a man. It seemed not only beautiful women were trouble, but beautiful men were also trouble. With that thought in mind, she cast a glance at the stunned white-robed male cultivator. His face was handsome enough, but his blank expression and bewildered look couldn't compare to Xianxia's bearing in the slightest. She really didn't know what these female cultivators saw in him. Being handsome wasn't enough for a man. Temperament and demeanor were more important. Take Xianxia for example. He wasn't earth-shattering handsome, but his bearing was magnificent and outstanding. He was many times better than this Junior Marshal Brother Tang. "All of you shut up." Wei Haolan's shout startled Tiange back to her senses. She realized what she was thinking, so she felt vexed. She quickly restrained her thoughts and stopped letting her imagination run wild. Wei Haolan was obviously enraged. Her cold gaze swept over the several cultivators in front of her, and her expression darkened. Look at what you're doing. If you still have me, the sect head, in your eyes, shut up. You. Junior Marshal Sister Hua seemed to want to say something, but Wei Haolan didn't look like she was joking. In the end, she reluctantly shut her mouth and sat back down. Wei Haolan looked at Junior Marshal Brother Tang with a cold gaze. Junior Marshal Brother Tang, since you're late, I won't give you the medicinal pills. Yes. Junior Marshal Brother Tang answered in a low voice. Mo Tiange thought inwardly. Even if Wei Haolan didn't give it to him, there would naturally be others who would be willing to exchange for it, right? This method was useless against this popular Junior Marshal Brother Tang. That'll do. Wei Haolan's expression softened. You can exchange freely now. Upon hearing what she said, the atmosphere finally relaxed. The more than 20 cultivators gathered together and whispered to each other. Wei Haolan turned around and forced a smile at Mo Tiange. Fellow Daoist Yi, please forgive us for our lack of discipline. Mo Tiange smiled faintly and said carelessly, Sect head Wei doesn't need to mind. I've seen this kind of thing many times in Kunwu. It's nothing. Really? Wei Haolan didn't seem to be in the mood to chat today. She said, now's the time to exchange freely, so I won't take up any more of fellow Daoist time. Fellow Daoist, please help yourself. I still have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. Mo Tiange nodded. Sect head Wei, please. Wei Haolan smiled, then hurriedly stood up and left. As soon as Wei Haolan left, someone immediately went to look for Mo Tiange. It was Junior Marshal Sister Hua. Fellow Daoist Yi. Mo Tiange was displeased by this woman's domineering behavior, but her expression remained indifferent. Fellow Daoist, what's the matter? Junior Marshal Sister Hua's eyes moved around as if she was observing whether other people were looking at them. She then asked in a low voice, Fellow Daoist Yi, you must have more medicinal pills, right? How about I add a few more things in exchange for them? If fellow Daoist doesn't want to exchange with other people, I can give you twice the amount of beast cores. Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows slightly but didn't answer. Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't answer, Junior Marshal Sister Hua added, Fellow Daoist Yi, I'm the blood-related descendant of Elder Qingmiao from my group. If you're willing to exchange with me, I'll put in a good word for you in front of my clan's ancestor. At that time, when my ancestor sees you, he might be happy and reward you with good things. At first, Mo Tiange didn't think much of it, but when she heard what she said, she couldn't help but laugh in her heart. If she was an individual cultivator, she probably wouldn't give up the opportunity to make friends with a core formation cultivator. However, she clearly said she was a Xianxia school disciple who left the mountain to travel under her master's orders. Did an elite disciple of Xianxia school need to curry favor with a core formation cultivator from a small cultivation group like Bishuan Court? It seemed this Junior Marshal Sister Hua really had a backer, so she didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Mo Tiange's wealth wasn't inferior to that of ordinary core formation cultivators, but based on her pill concocting skills alone, she was able to take out more than 10 bottles of medicinal pills at once. This Bishuan court elder most likely still wanted to make friends with her. Fellow Daoist Yi. Seeing that Mo Tiange still didn't answer, Junior Marshal Sister Hua raised her brows and said in annoyance, I'm willing to give you more beast cores. Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Mo Tiange just cast a careless glance at her as if she didn't take what Junior Marshal Sister Hua said seriously. Fellow Daoist, you're thinking too much. I already said I only have this many medicinal pills. Even if I wanted to trade, I wouldn't be able to take them out. You, Junior Marshal Sister Hua was furious. She obviously didn't believe Mo Tiange, but in the end she was still unwilling to give up, so she threatened, You better think it through. Mo Tiange's tone was still indifferent. I really don't have any. Even if I wanted to trade, I wouldn't be able to. Mo Tiange wasn't worried at all about this unruly young Mrs. Words. Previously, Mo Tiange wasn't sure, But now that she had seen the internal situation of Bishuan court, she was very clear that with her pill concocting skills, she didn't have to worry about Bishuan court going back on their word. Besides, Wei Haolon didn't take this young Mrs. Word seriously, so what was there for her to be afraid of? Chapter 199. Following that, Emo Tienga continued to exchange some Kunwu spiritual plants for beast core materials, among which there was no lack of good stuff. In the end, that unruly young lady surnamed Hua didn't bother her, but she sat on the side with an unhappy expression and glared at her from time to time. Emo Tienga turned a blind eye to her. She wasn't a childish person, so how could she have the leisure to argue with a young lady who hadn't seen the world? Sure enough, there were female cultivators who were willing to exchange medicinal pills with that junior martial brother Tang. Emo Tienga noticed that the medicinal pills he exchanged for were actually more than the others, so much so that the other male cultivators looked unhappy. But there was nothing she could do about it. Who told him to be so charming? Before long, the exchange party was finally over. Emo Tienga bid farewell to several female cultivators she was familiar with, then went down the loft. Yi Lu was waiting for her downstairs. When she saw her, she came over and saluted her. "Senior Yi," Emo Tienga said, "let's go back." "Yes," Yi Lu answered and continued to lead the way. Emo Tienga stared at Yi Lu and suddenly asked, "Is there a foundation building cultivator surnamed Tang in your school?" Yi Lu turned her head and answered, "Senior Yi, Tang is my school's Grandmaster Xianxia's surname, so there are many cultivators surnamed Tang in my school. May I know which one Senior Yi is talking about?" "Could it be that junior martial brother Tang is related to Elder Xianxia? I'm talking about a male cultivator in the early stage of the foundation building realm. He came in 2 hours late to the exchange party just now." Yi Lu paused, looked at her cautiously and said, "Senior Yi, you're talking about Martial Uncle Tang Shen, right? Martial Uncle Tang is Grandmaster Xianxia's great-great-grandson." "I see." It was no wonder that although this person was a male cultivator, his status wasn't low. Those female cultivators who called him Big Brother Tang must also have a family background, right? Doesn't he have a dual cultivation partner? Yi Lu looked at her cautiously and said after some deliberation, "Senior Yi, Martial Uncle Tang currently doesn't have a dual cultivation partner. However, his marriage has been discussed, but it hasn't been decided yet." Upon seeing Emo Tienga's reaction, Emo Tienga knew Yi Lu had misunderstood. However, she didn't explain and just nodded to show she understood. Yi Lu thought for a moment. She still seemed a little worried, so she said, "Our Grandmaster Xianxia really likes Martial Uncle Tang. Martial Uncle Tang grew up with Grandmaster Xianxia, so even though he's a male cultivator, his status in the group is very high." Emo Tienga could see this even if she didn't have eyes. She smiled and asked, "Are there many people who like him?" Yi Lu was somewhat startled by this straightforward question. She paused for a moment before nodding. "Yes, Martial Uncle Tang. He's handsome and he's also Grandmaster Xianxia's favorite junior. Who wouldn't like him?" This reason, Emo Tienga had to admit that although it was superficial, it was also the truth. There were also a lot of female disciples in Shenqing school who liked senior martial brother Shoujing. Didn't many of them also like him for the same reason? However, when she saw Yi Lu's blushing face, she asked curiously, "Are you the same?" Yi Lu was stunned by his question. She hurriedly looked left and right before saying in a low voice, "Senior Yi, don't talk nonsense. Because of Martial Uncle Tang's dual cultivation, the martial uncles in the sect often fight each other. You'll get me killed if you say that." "Often fight each other?" Emo Tienga couldn't help but be surprised. She didn't find it strange that these women fought each other at the exchange gathering, but it was strange that they fought each other often. Could it be that their elders didn't care? Perhaps this topic aroused Yi Lu's interest in talking. She carefully looked around and said, "There are a lot of martial uncles under the 3 grandmasters who like Martial Uncle Tang. There's Martial Uncle Yang and Martial Uncle Wen under Grandmaster Xianxia, Martial Uncle Hua, Martial Uncle Ming, and Martial Uncle Yun under Grandmaster Qingmiao, and Martial Uncle Lu under Grandmaster Qingyi. These are the ones who fight quite fiercely. There are also many who don't fight too fiercely. There's nothing we can do about it. There are very few high-level male cultivators in Linhai, and there are even fewer handsome ones. Upon hearing the two surnames Yun and Lu, Mo Tiange's gaze flickered. So these two people are Qingmiao and Qingyi's disciples? But this had nothing to do with her. She already planned to bury this matter in her heart and pretend she never knew about it. Senior Yi. Seeing that Mo Tiange's gaze was wandering as if she was thinking about something, Yi Lu stammered. Mo Tienge was absent-minded. Biting her lip, Yi Lu finally made up her mind and said, "You'd better not meddle in Martial Uncle Tang's business. You're a cultivator from Kunwu, so the Grandmasters definitely won't let Martial Uncle Tang go with an outsider." Mo Tienge was stunned, but she couldn't help but laugh. Did Yi Lu also think she admired that Tang Shen? Although she had to admit that Tang Shen's appearance wasn't inferior to Qin Shi's, appearance didn't mean everything. Rest assured, I don't have any other intentions. By the time she finished speaking, they had arrived at the VIP building, so she didn't say anything more and went inside. There were still some part-time disciples in the VIP building who did menial work. Yi Lu looked at them, then stopped talking and followed Mo Tienge inside. "Senior Yi, is there anything else?" Yi Lu hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Senior Yi, I heard your pill concocting skills are very brilliant. I want to ask, Senior, we want to exchange some things for medicinal pills. Is that possible?" Mo Tienge said, "I don't have any foundation building medicinal pills left, but if you want aura refining medicinal pills, I still have some." "Really?" Yi Lu was overjoyed. "Senior Yi, we only need aura refining medicinal pills. I have beast cores, spirit stones, and these." Knowing she still had medicinal pills, Yi Lu hastily pulled off the Qianquan bag on her waist. After rummaging through a few things, she said, "Oh, Senior, wait a moment. Bichio still has some." She then ran out excitedly without waiting for Mo Tienge's answer. Mo Tienge shook her head with a smile, then laid a defensive formation again. She had to be careful when she was outside, especially when the people around her had ulterior motives. She had always been very careful. She made the people of Bichuan Court think she was useful, but she also didn't want to be useful to the point where they wanted to imprison her. However, she couldn't be careless, so she couldn't lack defensive formations. Before long, Yi Lu hurriedly ran back while pulling Ichio along. Both of them looked very happy. Once Ichio arrived, she also took out her Qianquan bag and took out several kinds of things. "Senior Yi, please take a look. Can I exchange these for medicinal pills?" Mo Tienge gave them a cursory glance. Each of them had 100 or 200 spirit stones, several first-rank beast cores, and some scattered materials. In the end, they were aura-refining cultivators. The things they could take out were far inferior to those of foundation-building cultivators. Thinking Mo Tienge was dissatisfied, Yi Lu said somewhat shyly, "Senior Yi, our cultivation levels are low, so we can't get anything good. We saved these spirit stones for a long time." Mo Tienge looked up with a smile, interrupting her. "All right, I'll exchange with you." She took out 4 jade bottles from her Qianquan bag. These 2 bottles contain aura-nourishing pills, which aura-refining cultivators usually take. There are 30 pills in each bottle. These 2 bottles contain aura-converging pills, which are 10 times more effective than aura-nourishing pills. There are 10 pills in each bottle. The 4 jade bottles were placed on the table. Yi Lu and Ichio were overjoyed. According to the price in Kunwu, these things were worth 500 or 600 spirit stones. Medicinal pills were even more difficult to obtain in Linhai, so they were worth far more. After taking the medicinal pills, they couldn't wait to open them and take a look. The 2 of them thanked Mo Tienge repeatedly. "Thank you for your reward, Senior Yi." They naturally knew that the spirit stones and medicinal pills they gave were far less than the value of these medicinal pills. "No need to thank me. Just take it as a reward for taking care of my chores these past few days." Mo Tienge never thought she could get anything from these 2 female aura-refining cultivators. In any case, these were just leftovers from when she concocted medicinal pills for Xinji. Thinking of Xinji, She was in a daze for a while. By now, Xinji should have returned to Mount Taikang and finished the foundation building pill test, right? She didn't know whether he passed or not. If he did, he should have entered closed-door meditation to build his foundation. She wasn't worried that Xinji wouldn't succeed. It was very rare for ordinary cultivators to succeed in building their foundation on the first try. With that master of hers watching over him, even if he didn't succeed, nothing would happen. Moreover, before she left, she secretly prepared several foundation-building pills and constitution-enhancing pills for Xinji, which she put in another small bag and told him to only take them out when he built his foundation. With the extra foundation-building pills she gave him, Xinji presumably had a great chance of successfully building his foundation. It was just that she didn't know whether he was obedient or not. Thinking up to this point, Tiange suddenly wanted to go back. Although she'd only been out for more than a year, it felt like a long time had passed. She missed Xinji, missed her master, and missed that small immortal's cave. She'd been at Xianxia school for almost 20 years. She had relatives, a master, and friends. She really considered Xianxia school her home. This feeling was very good. At least when she was injured or tired, she had a place to go back to. Yi Lu and Yi Qiu thanked her profusely and left. Tiange touched the space between her eyebrows and entered the virtual sky world, thinking about what to do next. Since she felt she'd been out for a long time, should she go back to Xianxia school? Generally speaking, from the late stage of the foundation building realm to the peak stage of the foundation building realm, it would take 30 to 50 years to cultivate smoothly. However, her aptitude was extraordinary now, and the medicinal pills she had were also much better than ordinary people's. Presumably, she would only need about 20 years. As for forming her gold core, it might take more than 10 years of preparation. As long as she wasn't too unlucky, her chances of forming her gold core shouldn't be too low. She was only 38 years old. If everything went smoothly, she would be able to form her gold core when she was around 70 years old. However, Tiange was somewhat hesitant about this decision. If she went back and continued her closed-door meditation, it would be meaningless for her to deliberately suppress her cultivation level and prevent herself from advancing too quickly. For ordinary cultivators, the faster they reached core formation, the better. In today's cultivation environment, no matter how diligent a cultivator was, it was very difficult for them to form their gold core before the age of 100. Therefore, in the celestial pole, it was difficult for a few cultivators to form their gold core before the age of 100 even in 1,000 years. Those who could do it were all called geniuses. Because of this, her senior martial brother Shou Jing was able to form his gold core before he was 100 years old even though his talent was not outstanding. That was why he was so famous. However, Tiange couldn't simply think of it this way. With a cultivation environment similar to the distant past era, geniuses from the distant past era, and countless medicinal pills, her spiritual aura grew very fast, and it was very difficult for her to encounter bottlenecks in realm breakthroughs. In this case, forming her gold core before she was 100 years old was almost certain. But after all, this wasn't the distant past era, so she would encounter problems that ordinary people wouldn't encounter. Her chief master once sighed in private that her senior martial brother Shou Jing formed his gold core too early. He was too young and his foundation was unstable. Fortunately, he liked to run around on his own and could be considered to have experienced a lot, so nothing bad happened to him. It was also because of this that her master repeatedly warned her that her mental state must keep up with him in order to form her gold core. Advancing her cultivation level too rashly wasn't a good thing. With this thought in mind, Tiange became hesitant. It had only been a year. The time she spent traveling was still too short. Chapter 200. Whether or not she could go back could be discussed later. At the very least, she'd have to stay at Bichuan Court for several months. Teaching alchemy was not an easy task. Pill recipes could be bought and sold, and the steps could be explained, but the things that needed to be paid attention to during alchemy were not clearly recorded in the pill recipe. Every alchemist had their own secrets, which were the key to success in alchemy. In addition, there was also how to form hand seals during alchemy. The pill recipe did not explain clearly. Most basic alchemy pills did not require hand seals, but some special alchemy pills required hand seals to perfectly mix the various ingredients together. Every alchemist had their own unique variations on these hand seals, which were different from the ones on the pill formulas. These changes, coupled with the time and alchemy fire during alchemy, were completely integrated to achieve the best results. Fortunately, Xiaqing was extremely talented in alchemy and comprehended very quickly. Imotienga felt Imotienga's talent was much higher than hers. It was just that Imotienga didn't have a lot of good materials for her to practice with, so her pill concocting realm couldn't advance. Little by little, Imotienga taught Xiaqing how to distinguish the degree of fusion between materials and what aspects to pay attention to when forming hand seals. Imotienga wasn't afraid that Wei Haolan wouldn't fulfill her promise after she taught Xiaqing. As soon as she entered Bishuan court, she already revealed that she left the mountain under her master's order. With Wei Haolan's experience, she should have known Imotienga was an elite disciple of Xianxia school the moment she heard what Imotienga said. Even though Bishuan court was located in Linhai, isolated from the rest of the world and thousands of miles away from Xianxia school, big cultivation groups always had some special methods to track the whereabouts of their disciples. If she was detained in Bishuan court and was investigated, a nascent soul cultivator from such a small cultivation group would be enough to consign them to eternal damnation. Every day, Imotienga would study the art of pill concocting with Xiaqing. Occasionally, when she was free, she would also discuss the path of cultivation with other Bishuan court cultivators. Several months passed by in a flash. Fellow Daoist Xia, Imotienga called out to Xiaqing, who was practicing figuring out the weight of materials. If someone else called out to her right now, Xiaqing definitely wouldn't even raise her head. However, since the person calling her was Imotienga, Xiaqing immediately raised her head. Fellow Daoist Yi, did I do something wrong? Imotienga chuckled, then took out several jade slips from her robe and handed them to him. It's precisely because you've already done very well that I have nothing to teach you. Here are some pill recipes, and I've written down some things that I need to take note of. Xiaqing's eyes lit up when she heard those words. She hurriedly received the jade slips, immersed her consciousness into them, and began to read them with great interest. That's all my tricks. I've already taught you all of them. In the future, you can figure them out on your own. In the future, your alchemy skills will definitely be better than mine. Imotienga felt that she had too many things she had to do. Cultivation was her priority, and the Tao of formations was her foundation. Only after that would she have to focus on concocting medicinal pills. Xiaqing, on the other hand, was wholeheartedly focused on concocting medicinal pills. Presumably, even if Imotienga had countless high-grade spiritual plants she could use, she still might not be able to surpass Xiaqing in terms of concocting medicinal pills in the future. Xiaqing hastily withdrew her attention from the jade slip. That's it? Fellow Daoist Yi, I still have a lot to learn, and I can't be like you. Fellow Daoist Xia, my pill refinement skills aren't much better than yours, so this is all I can do. Moreover, concocting medicinal pills requires constant experimentation and contemplation. It's not something that can be done just by saying it. I can only help you avoid some detours. The rest will depend on you to do it slowly. Xiaqing had a very good understanding of concocting medicinal pills, so she couldn't help but nod when she heard what Imotienga said. You're right? Imotienga smiled. All right, take your time to practice. I'll head back first. All right. Xiaqing couldn't wait to continue studying. After saying goodbye to Imotienga, she once again immersed herself in the jade slips. Seeing her like this, Imotienga shook her head and slowly walked out of the concocting room. Outside, Yi Lu and Yi Qiu were already waiting for her. When they saw her coming out, they bowed. Senior Yi. The two of them had obtained a lot of benefits from Imotienga during this period of time, so they were even more respectful when they called her senior. Imotienga didn't directly go back like she usually did. Instead, she said to them, I want to see your sect head. Yi Lu and Yi Qiu glanced at each other. Yi Lu then said, Senior, please wait here for a moment. Junior will go and inform the sect head. Imotienga nodded. All right. Ilu bowed then left in a hurry. Ichio said, Senior, this place is quite far from the sect head's main hall, so Ilu might have to wait for quite a long time. How about Junior accompany Senior to stroll around first? Sure, Tienge answered indifferently. Ichio then gave some instructions to the supervisor in charge of the concocting room, then led Tienge to the garden. There were many women in Bishuan court, so they also put a lot of thought into the scenery. Aside from the medicinal garden that every cultivation group had, they even arranged a garden with many exotic flowers and plants from the Eastern Sea. They were all very beautiful. Ichio led Tienge to a gazebo next to the rockery, then said, Senior Yi, look at these flowers and plants. Although they aren't very rare spiritual plants, they can't be found anywhere else. As Tienge stared at the flowers and plants in front of her, she couldn't help but praise the skillful hands of Bishuan court's female disciples. She had never seen such a beautiful garden before. Among the cultivation groups in the cultivation world, aside from Bishuan court, who else had the time to arrange a garden? It was already December now, and the new year would be coming soon. It was the coldest season. However, this garden was protected by a formation, so it was still as warm as spring and hundreds of flowers were in full bloom. Ichio suddenly exclaimed, Isn't that Martial Uncle Tang? Tienge followed Ichio's gaze. Wasn't that the popular young Master Tang, Tangshan? Why did he seem to be avoiding their gazes? Upon seeing that they'd already noticed him, Tangshan's face flushed. Tienge was secretly amused. This young Master Tang was really like a daughter from a noble family. He really liked to blush. But what was he looking at them for? Just as she was thinking, Tangshan clenched his teeth. He seemed to have made up his mind and walked towards them. Tienge became even more confused. Ichio, who was next to her, whispered, Martial Uncle Tang. Before Tienge could say anything, Tangshan was already in front of them. He looked at the two of them somewhat shyly before his gaze finally fell on Tienge. He said in a low voice, Fellow Daoist, in the past few months in Bishuan court, aside from going to the concocting room, Tienge only occasionally accepted Wei Haolan's invitation to exchange some cultivation knowledge. She and Tangshan only met a few times, and each time, they didn't talk much. At most, they just greeted each other. Because of that, Tienge only nodded faintly. Fellow Daoist Tang, what a coincidence. Tangshan made an sound, then rubbed his hands anxiously. He then looked at Ichio again. Ichio was rather bewildered, but after Tangshan looked at her several times, she suddenly seemed to realize something. She was inwardly surprised, but her expression didn't change. She bowed towards the two of them and said, Senior Yi, Martial Uncle Tang, Junior still has something to do. Take your time and talk. I'll leave for a moment. Before Tienge could respond, Tangshan already said impatiently, Go. Upon hearing what Tangshan said, Tienge could only swallow her words and watch as Ichio slowly left the garden. It was already evening. There were no people playing in the garden, nor were there any part-time disciples working. The two of them were alone. Tienge suddenly felt a bit funny. If this scene was seen by this young Master Tang's admirer, she'd most likely become Bishuan court's public enemy tomorrow. She really didn't know what this young Master Tang wanted to say. Ichio left, but Tangshan still looked hesitant. Sometimes he rubbed his hands, and sometimes he wiped his palms. Tienge really didn't like a man acting like this, so she took the initiative to speak. Fellow Daoist Tang, is there something you need? Tangshan was startled back to his senses. He gulped, seemingly trying to calm himself down. Fellow Daoist, let's sit down and talk. Tienge glanced around. There was only a small table in the pavilion, so no matter how they sat, it would look too intimate. She said, It's the same if we stand and talk. What she said was obviously a refusal. She didn't want to appear intimate with him. Tangshan glanced at her with a bit of surprise, but his mood actually calmed down. Ever since he was a child, he had many admirers. Bishuan court was a cultivation group for female cultivators, so the martial sisters he grew up with always wanted to get close to him. He also always thought female cultivators were the same. But now, he could see that this fellow Daoist Yi didn't want to be too intimate with him, so he heaved a sigh of relief. As for what he wanted to say next, he also felt it would be easier for him to say it. I heard fellow Daoist Yi will soon return to Kunwu, right? Mo Tiange nodded. I've taught all my pill concocting skills to fellow Daoist Xiaqing, so I'll be leaving soon. Then, Tang Shen cautiously glanced at her. Can I leave with fellow Daoist Yi? Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. She stared at Tang Shen for a while and only said faintly when she saw his face blushing again, fellow Daoist Tang, as Elder Qingxi's beloved grandson, it shouldn't be a problem for you to leave Linhai, right? Why do you want to leave with me? Tang Shen glanced at her nervously, then said in a low voice, although I can leave at any time, great-grandmother doesn't feel at ease leaving me alone. However, the Marshall sisters in the group are too clingy, and the Marshall brothers aren't very friendly to me. Mo Tiange frowned and said in confusion, could it be that your ancestor isn't worried I might have bad intentions? I don't think fellow Daoist Yi is a bad person. Tang Shen looked up and glanced at her. I'm not afraid of fellow Daoist Yi laughing at me, but ever since I was a child, I've always been surrounded by a group of martial sisters, so I don't like to get along with women. But our Bichuan court is like this, all of us are female cultivators. I heard great-grandmothers say Kunwu isn't like this, so I wanted to… Fellow Daoist Tang. Mo Tiange interrupted him. Please forgive me for speaking bluntly, but if you've never left Linhai and your ancestor is very fond of you, I can't leave with you. If something happened to you, I wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. It's not like that. Upon hearing her refusal, Tang Shen hastily said, I'm just not familiar with Kunwu, and fellow Daoist Yi is a disciple of a famous group, so I just want to go with you to Kunwu to take a look. I don't want fellow Daoist Yi to bear any responsibility. That's true, but would your ancestor think the same? Although she wasn't afraid of Bichuan Court's core formation cultivators, she also didn't want to take responsibility for herself. Fellow Daoist Tang, have you ever mentioned this to your ancestor? Tang Shen was rendered speechless. After a long time, he finally shook his head. I want to wait for fellow Daoist Yi to agree, then I'll talk to great-grandmother. Upon seeing his appearance, Mo Tiange couldn't help but sigh. Fellow Daoist Tang, I don't want your ancestor to misunderstand that I'm abducting her beloved descendant, so you'd better explain it to her first. Besides, to be honest, with fellow Daoist temperament, it's better to have fellow disciples accompanying you. No matter how fellow disciples treat you, they'll always be more reliable than an outsider like me. Chapter 201. Fellow Daoist Yi. After being rejected, Tang Shen still didn't give up. However, he wasn't good with words, so he couldn't reason with her, so he could only walk around Mo Tiange in circles. Mo Tiange said helplessly, fellow Daoist Tang, you'll get me killed like this. Tang Shen looked puzzled. Mo Tiange felt even more helpless. If this appearance was seen by others, this admirer of young Master Tang's would definitely hate her to the bone and might even fight her with a sword. With their jealous temperaments, she wouldn't be able to explain herself at that time. Big Brother Tang. Just as she thought about this, the two of them heard a voice. Mo Tiange turned around and a frown immediately appeared on her face. It was actually Junior Marshal Sister Hua, young Master Tang's crazy admirer. Good things never come true, but bad things always do. Being seen by this person? Isn't she trying to kill me? This Junior Marshal Sister Hua was alone, but she aggressively approached fellow Daoist Yi. She stared at fellow Daoist Yi and asked condescendingly, fellow Daoist Yi, what are you talking about with Big Brother Tang? He's the one talking, not me. Mo Tiange thought. She looked at Junior Marshal Sister Hua, who was half a head taller than her, and said flatly, nothing. If fellow Daoist Hua wants to know, you can ask fellow Daoist Tang. Is that so? Her knife-like gaze cut Mo Tiange's face. Mo Tiange didn't doubt that this woman wanted to cut off the flesh on her face piece by piece. She smiled bitterly in her heart. Although Bichuan Court's female cultivators were strong, this wasn't a world where women were respected. Even a soft-hearted man like Tang Shen would probably prefer that junior martial sister Yun she met in Ziwei's Immortal's cave who liked to act coquettishly, right? Of course, strong women could also be cute, but if their strength turned into coercion, they wouldn't be cute at all. Tiange didn't do anything shameful, so she wasn't afraid of her. She didn't back down and just said coldly, "Does fellow Daoist Hua have anything else to say?" Seeing that Tiange didn't seem to have a guilty conscience, junior martial sister Hua frowned. "Fellow Daoist Yi, I want to ask you what you want to do. Why are you talking to Big Brother Tang instead of studying pill concocting with junior martial sister Xiaqing?" Seeing that Tiange didn't answer, junior martial sister Hua took another step towards her. "Fellow Daoist Yi, I have to remind you, don't covet things that don't belong to you." Tiange didn't feel weak under Hua Jiyu's intense gaze. Instead, she felt like laughing. She was going to leave anyway, so there was no need for her to be afraid of anything. Thus, the corners of her lips curled into a sneer and she said, "Fellow Daoist Hua, you might as well remind yourself of this." This junior martial sister Hua obviously didn't expect Tiange would refute her. Moreover, Tiange's words were very rude, so she was stunned for a moment before she finally understood what was going on. She instantly became furious. "Yi Xiaotian, don't be so shameless." The angrier she got, the calmer Tiange became. She even had a smile on her face. "Fellow Daoist Hua, haven't you always wanted to teach me a lesson? Why hasn't he made a move yet? Let me give you a piece of advice. A frog at the bottom of a well can't talk about the sea. With fellow Daoist Hua's temperament, it's fine if he stays in Linhai for the rest of his life, but if he goes to Kunwu one day..." Junior martial sister Hua's expression changed greatly when she heard Tiange's rude words. In all of Bishuan court, aside from the three elders, no one else dared to talk to her like that. However, Tiange's ice-cold expression made her feel a bit guilty. She also recalled what her elders said a few months ago. "You want to teach that Yi Xiaotian a lesson? Third girl, you really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." She was unconvinced. "Great-grandmother, she's just a Kunwu cultivator, what's wrong with teaching her a lesson? She still needs our help, but she's actually giving me that attitude." Her great-grandmother, Elder Qingmiao, flung her long sleeves and said coldly, "I said you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth, but you still won't admit it. You've been spoiled rotten by your mother since you were a child. She's just a Kunwu cultivator? You were also there when your senior martial sister sect head made her report. Didn't you hear she's a Xianqing school cultivator? But she's just a foundation-building cultivator, what's so great about her? But she also said she left the mountain to travel under her master's order." Elder Qingmiao glared at her, feeling exasperated at her for failing to meet her expectations. Xianqing school can only accept disciples if they're in the core formation realm or above. Her master must be a core formation cultivator without a doubt. If she's favored, her status in the school won't be lower than yours. They have more nascent soul cultivators than us core formation cultivators. We can't afford to provoke them." She was dumbfounded and momentarily forgot to reply. Ever since she was born, she was the direct descendant of a core formation cultivator, so she was doted on. She never expected a foreign cultivator might have a status not lower than hers. Pulling herself back to reality, she stared at Tiange, who was looking at her with an arrogant expression. She'd always used this expression on others. When had anyone ever treated her like this? She was so angry that she lost all reason and said angrily, "Who do you think you are? You actually dared to talk to me like that? Then who do you think you are?" Tiange showed a faint smile, looking calm and composed. "My cultivation level isn't much, and I don't have any strong points." "Do you really think you're amazing just because you have a core formation elder? Elder sister, with your attitude, you can forget about forming your gold core for the rest of your life. You can just stay in the early stage of the foundation building realm and dream until you die." "You!" Without saying another word, she pulled out her flying sword and was about to stab Tiange. Tiange took a step back and stared at Tang Shen, who was staring blankly in the corner. "Fellow Daoist Tang, Huh. Tang Shen was at a loss. Do you want to watch your junior martial sister attack a guest in the school? Tang Shen didn't understand and hastily pulled out his magic tool. Junior martial sister Hua. Seeing that Tang Shen wanted to protect Mo Tiange, this junior martial sister Hua became even angrier. Big brother Tang, you actually attacked me for her. Tang Shen wasn't very confident, but in the end he still plucked up his courage and said, "But fellow Daoist Yi is our honored guest. How could you attack an honored guest?" Honored guest? This junior martial sister Hua sneered. Have you ever seen an honored guest mocking their master? She's the one mocking me. She's right. A dignified voice came from the side. The three of them turned around and saw a middle-aged woman dressed in plain clothes standing at the entrance of the garden. This woman seemed to be about 40 years old. She didn't have any wrinkles on her face, looked dignified, and had an overbearing aura. Behind her were several maids holding cups. They were quiet and didn't make a single sound. Upon seeing this person, Tang Shen and this junior martial sister Hua were both dumbfounded. Soon after, the two of them hastily put away their magic tools and knelt to salute her. Great-grandmother. Greetings to elder. The woman nodded slightly and walked over slowly. Her sharp gaze was fixed on Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile, then cupped her hands and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Junior Yi Xiaoyan greets Elder Qingmiao." Upon hearing this, a hint of admiration appeared in the woman's eyes. She softened her tone and said, "No need to be so polite. You're a smart child." Mo Tiange lowered her hands, lowered her eyes, and didn't say anything. This Elder Qingmiao also no longer looked at her. Her gaze fell on the two juniors kneeling on the ground. Stand up. Tang Shen looked up anxiously, then answered with a low voice, "Yes. Thank you, elder." This junior martial sister Hua also wanted to stand up, but when she raised her head and saw the stern gaze on her, she didn't have the courage. She bit her lip and continued to kneel. Some maids had already come to tidy up the mess in the pavilion, laid down the plates and cushions, then retreated to the side. Elder Qingmiao walked into the pavilion and sat down. She took the green tea the maids had just brewed and slowly took a sip. She then said, "Lin, well, you're already in your 40s this year, right?" Junior martial sister Hua, who was kneeling on the ground, answered in a low voice. The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth curled up. In fact, she called this woman big sister, just to annoy her. She didn't expect the woman to be older than her, so what she said just now wasn't wrong. She was already in her 40s, but she was still so unruly. Even if foundation building cultivators had a lifespan of more than 300 years, based on the way she lived, she wouldn't make any progress even if she lived for more than 300 years. In this lifetime, she shouldn't even think about advancing to the middle stage or late stage. Elder Qingmiao put down her teacup and her gaze turned cold. "You're already in your 40s, yet you still have the nerve to admit it. I've told you before, don't be so arrogant. You didn't listen to me." "But, great-grandmother, but what?" Elder Qingmiao interrupted her and slammed the table. "Hua Yilin, do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have an old woman like me as your backer? Your mother didn't teach you well since you were young, and you don't know how to learn well. If you had the ability, you could have formed your gold core by yourself. But what do you have now? You're just an initial stage foundation establishment cultivator, yet you don't know how to improve." Mo Tiange stood on the side, watching as if this matter had nothing to do with her. So this junior martial sister Hua's name was Hua Yilin. What a waste of a good name. Hua Yilin, who was kneeling on the ground, pursed her lips and said nothing. Elder Qingmiao glared at her angrily. "What? Do you feel wronged? I think this little fellow Daoist is right. Just because he had a core formation elder, he thought he was really something. Can you rely on me for the rest of your life? Do you not want to make a realm breakthrough in the future? Last time, when I sent a disciple out, I should have thrown you out and let you go to Kunwu to broaden your horizons, lest you embarrass yourself in the future." His words were harsh, and they were truly ruthless. Hua Yilin's eyes reddened. She glared at Mo Tiange angrily, but she didn't dare to refute. Elder Qingmiao became even angrier. What? You're not convinced? Fine, since there are guests here today, I won't lecture you too much. Go to the reflection temple and face the wall by yourself. You're not allowed to come out until I say you can. Great-grandmother! Hua Yilin was so shocked that tears fell from her eyes. Quickly go. Elder Qingmiao glared at her mercilessly. Mo Tiange bit her lip, stood up, and dashed away. Seeing her leaving obediently, Elder Qingmiao's expression finally relaxed. She then glanced at Tang Shen. Shen, if there's nothing else, go and serve your great-grandmother. She was thinking about you just now. Tang Shen felt as if he was granted amnesty. He hastily saluted and said, yes. Then he hurriedly ran away. In the blink of an eye, aside from Mo Tiange, Elder Qingmiao and her maids were the only ones left on the scene. Mo Tiange's gaze flickered, but in the end, she chose to remain silent. She used the method she used to deal with elders at Xianxia school. She lowered her head and stood quietly on the side. Elder Qingmiao didn't look at her right away. Instead, she took the handkerchief the maid gave her, carefully wiped her face, then raised her head to look at Mo Tiange. She looked at her very carefully and for a long time, but Mo Tiange's expression remained calm. Finally, Elder Qingmiao withdrew her gaze, picked up the teacup again, and said slowly, "Little fellow Daoist, you really aren't simple." Chapter 202. This was Mo Tiange's first time meeting Elder Qingmiao. She'd been at Bishuan court for several months, but all this time, it was always Wei Haolan and the other foundation-building cultivators who received her. The three core formation elders had never met her. Of course, he was a core formation realm senior. Generally speaking, core formation cultivators cultivated in seclusion. Who would want to meet a junior who wasn't from their own sect? They weren't that free, and they wouldn't do something that would lower their status. However, even if she hadn't met the three core formation elders, she was never worried Elder Qingmiao would really harm her. She had taken over Shangqing Palace's affairs and helped Lord Daoist Jinghe make connections, so Mo Tiange was very clear about the twists and turns in the hearts of high-level cultivators in cultivation groups. In the eyes of high-grade cultivators, especially those who supported their sects, no matter how much they doted on their juniors, it was impossible for it to affect their view of benefits. Although they doted on their children, they couldn't mix these feelings with official business. Therefore, Hua Yilin's threats sounded like a joke to those in the know. But now, Elder Qingmiao used this kind of tone to say something like that to her, which was thought-provoking. Not simple? What was not simple? Aside from her pill-concocting skills, in the eyes of Bishuan court cultivators, Mo Tiange was just an ordinary foreign cultivator. What Elder Qingmiao said definitely wasn't a compliment to her pill-concocting skills. Mo Tiange's expression didn't change. She merely raised her gaze slightly and said, "Senior, you flatter me." Elder Qingmiao gently swirled the teacup in her hand but didn't drink it. She said slowly, "I wasn't praising you." Since Senior didn't say anything, Junior can only take it as praise. Mo Tiange still had a faint smile on her face. It seemed she didn't mind Mo Tiange's words at all. Elder Qingmiao once again looked up at her with a sharp gaze. Mo Tiange didn't feel guilty at all and just let her look. Time passed bit by bit. Elder Qingmiao even used the spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator, but Mo Tiange still had a faint smile on her face. Although her smile was somewhat stiff and her forehead was even covered in sweat, she was still smiling in the end. After a long time, Elder Qingmiao finally withdrew her spiritual aura pressure and asked coldly, "Who are you in the end?" Mo Tiange secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Even though she cultivated the soul-refining art and the strength of her divine sense was far stronger than that of cultivators in the same realm as her, a core formation cultivator was still a core formation cultivator. She almost used all her strength to resist this spiritual aura pressure. She naturally knew why Elder Qingmiao treated her like this. Mo Tiange had long formed a habit of using her divine sense to pay attention to her surroundings at all times, so she immediately knew Elder Qingmiao was here. But even though she knew, she still said those words to Hua Yilin. As a core formation cultivator, Elder Qingmiao couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed when a junior was lectured like that by a junior. It was precisely because she couldn't hold back her pride that she reprimanded Hua Yilin even more. She wanted to show that as a core formation cultivator, she would never shield a junior and lower her status. However, reprimanding was one thing, but in the end, they were still her descendants. She also wanted to see why this junior who dared to lecture her descendants had such guts. He knew a core formation cultivator was coming, but he still wanted to teach a disciple of Bishuan court a lesson. How could an early-stage foundation-building cultivator be so bold? Mo Tiange only took a moment to think before she answered. Junior is the disciple of Lord Daoist Xianyin from Xianqing School. Lord Daoist Xianyin. Elder Qingmiao slowly uttered this Daoist name. The way she looked at Mo Tiange gradually changed. In the end, the fierceness in her expression disappeared and she showed a faint smile. Turns out your master is a nascent soul cultivator. No wonder he has such guts. Even if she didn't know about Lord Daoist Xianyin, he was naturally a nascent soul cultivator. As one of the 3 great core formation elders with the highest cultivation level in Bishuan court, Elder Qingmiao naturally wouldn't be ignorant of this. Mo Tiange merely smiled and maintained her politeness. Junior was just very lucky. Although that was the case, how could a nascent soul cultivator accept a disciple so easily? If she had a nascent soul cultivator as her master, the benefits would be obvious. After forming her gold core, every step of cultivation would be difficult. 2/3 of core formation cultivators would be stuck in the early stage of the core formation realm for their entire lives. With the guidance of a nascent soul cultivator, not only would they be able to avoid many detours in the core formation realm, but they could also give them pointers when they tried to form their nascent soul. As Elder Qingmiao thought about it carefully, she couldn't help but feel jealous. Although she was an elder of a cultivation group and a dignified core formation cultivator, she couldn't worship a nascent soul senior as her master right now. Nevertheless, she was an elder of a cultivation group after all. So she quickly calmed down and said with a faint smile, "In that case, little fellow Daoist must have excellent spiritual roots and extraordinary talents, right?" Mo Tiange answered faintly, "Junior's aptitude isn't bad, so Junior was able to receive Master as her master's disciple." "Is that so?" "Little fellow Daoist's pill concocting skills are also extraordinary," Elder Qingmiao said disapprovingly. Mo Tiange was keenly aware of something. Her gaze fell on Elder Qingmiao's half-smiling face and she said bluntly, "Does Senior have some advice?" Elder Qingmiao stood up and slowly paced around the pavilion, seemingly thinking about something. After a long time, she finally said, "Little friend Yi, do you know of a kind of medicinal pill called Clear Sky Pill?" Mo Tiange was stunned. This is a high-level core formation medicinal pill that's 10 times better than soul-solidifying pills. When she first obtained the virtual sky world, because the medicinal plants growing inside were very suitable for concocting this pill, she used this Clear Sky Pill to practice. "Correct." Elder Qingmiao nodded. "Little friend Yi really came from a famous cultivation group. Your vision is extraordinary. Very few people know about this Clear Sky Pill. Junior's master also made a realm breakthrough several years ago, so Junior can still be considered clear about matters related to the core formation realm." Elder Qingmiao smiled at her while walking slowly. "Even so, I can see that little friend Yi is very valued by your master." At first, she called her little friend Yi, but now she called her little friend Yi. This form of address was much more intimate. Mo Tiange could tell that Elder Qingmiao intentionally wanted to get closer to her. Based on what she said, it was very likely related to medicinal pills. In any case, she still had some confidence in the Tao of pill concocting, so she didn't avoid the topic. "Yes, Junior's achievements today are all thanks to Master's careful guidance." Seeing how calm Mo Tiange was, Elder Qingmiao inwardly re-evaluated her identity. "Little friend Yi has such brilliant pill concocting skills and knows about Clear Sky pills, so can you concoct them?" "I've concocted them a few times with Master, so I can, but if I were to concoct them myself, I'm afraid the success rate wouldn't be too high." She didn't tell the truth. In fact, she didn't concoct many soul-solidifying pills, but she concocted many clear sky pills. For her, the success rate of concocting clear sky pills was much higher than concocting soul-solidifying pills. However, how could it be so easy for a foundation-building cultivator to successfully concoct clear sky pills? This explanation was more in line with the truth. Sure enough, Elder Qingyao didn't doubt her. She nodded and said, "If you've only concocted them a few times, your success rate naturally wouldn't be high. What's your estimate of your success rate?" Mo Tiange paused for a moment, then answered with uncertainty, "About 40 to 50%. Elder Qingmiao smiled. 40 to 50% is already pretty good. It seems little friend Ye's pill concocting skills are indeed extraordinary. 30 to 40% was the standard for ordinary concoctions masters. Although 40 to 50% seemed like an uncertain increase of 10%, it was already close to the level of great concoctions masters. After all, clear sky pills were high-grade medicinal pills, so they were several times more difficult to concoct than soul-solidifying pills. Even in Kunwu, there weren't many people who could reach the level of great concoctions masters. Little friend Yi. Elder Qingmiao hesitated for a moment, but a moment later, she made up her mind. During this period of time, we've been watching you teaching that girl Xia Qing pill concocting skills, so we have a good idea of your pill concocting skills. It just so happens that during this period of time, the three of us have gathered enough spiritual plants for a furnace of clear sky pills, so we need to concoct a furnace of pills. However, Xia Qing has never concocted clear sky pills before, so she's not confident. If we send people to Kunwu to ask someone to concoct pills for us, it'll take too much time, and it'll also be hard to find a trustworthy person, so. She stopped and looked at Mo Tiange. Little friendy, could you concoct a furnace of clear sky pills for us? Mo Tiange didn't answer immediately. Concocting clear sky pills wasn't a trivial matter. Not to mention the success rate, it would also take a long time. Of course. We trust little friend Ye's pill concocting skills, and we trust little friend Ye's character even more. If the concoction fails, we definitely won't make things difficult for you. If you succeed, we'll prepare another generous gift to thank little friend Yi for helping us. Mo Tiange glanced at Elder Qingmiao, then continued to ponder. After a long time, a smile finally appeared on her face. Since Senior said so, I have no reason to refuse. Elder Qingmiao looked delighted. She warmly held Mo Tiange's hand and patted it. Good. Although little friend Yi is a nascent soul senior's disciple and is used to seeing precious treasures, we old fellows can still give you one or two unique little things. Elder Qingmiao called out, causing a maid in the queue to step forward. Her cultivation level was already in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, and she was only a step away from entering the foundation building realm. In the end, she was a core formation elder's maid, so her cultivation level was a bit higher than Yi Lu and Yi Qiu's. A few days ago, we caught a feifei. In a bit you can give it to little friendy. A hint of astonishment flitted across the maid's eyes, but she didn't say anything. She only answered, "Yes, Grandmaster." Mo Tiange also looked surprised. She thought for a moment, then asked, "Senior, are you talking about a kind of divine beast mentioned in ancient texts, feifei?" Elder Qingmiao was also surprised for a moment, but she soon smiled and said, "Little friend Ye's really knowledgeable. Nowadays, very few people know about these so-called divine beasts. However, the one I'm talking about isn't a real feifei. It just looks like a feifei and seems to have the bloodline of a divine beast, so people in the Eastern Sea call these spiritual beasts feifei. Although feifei's cultivation levels aren't high, they have miraculous effects that ordinary spiritual beasts don't have." "Oh? May I know what kind of miraculous effects it has?" Elder Qingmiao smiled and said, "According to ancient texts, feifei can relieve worries. The feifei we're talking about indeed has the effect of calming one's mind if you keep it by your side. In addition, feifei are very sensitive to spiritual aura, so they're the best for searching for things." "So that's how it is," Elder Qingmiao went on to say. Although this Feifei we're talking about isn't an ancient era's spiritual beast, it's not easy to find one in the Eastern Sea. This can be considered a greeting gift for little friend Yi. When the clear sky pills are successfully concocted, we'll prepare another generous gift for you. Even if it doesn't work, we'll still give little friend Yi compensation for your hard work. Since Senior said so, it would be impolite for me to refuse. Elder Qingmiao nodded with a smile. Little friend Yi is a straightforward person. If little friend Yi wasn't already a disciple of a famous school, this old woman would have appreciated your talent. What a pity, what a pity. Oh no, I mean, fortunately. Emo Tienga raised her head. The two of them smiled at each other. Whether they each had their own thoughts or not, they seemed to be very harmonious for now. However, it seemed their return to Kunwo would have to be delayed. Chapter 203. Once they finished talking about business, they chatted a bit more before Elder Qingyao left. Emo Tienga heaved a sigh of relief. What she told Elder Qingyao was always half true. Although she wasn't afraid Elder Qingyao would harm her, she still felt uneasy facing a core formation cultivator. Once Elder Qingyao left, Yi Lu and Yi Qiu came in. Senior Yi. Emo Tienga wiped her face. Why were you gone for so long? Yi Lu said, Junior came back a long time ago, but Elder Qingmiao was here, so Junior didn't dare to disturb you. That being said, although the sect head's conference hall was far away, it wouldn't take that long. She probably came back when Hua Yilin was here, but she didn't dare to come in. Emo Tienga didn't blame them. They were Bishuan court disciples after all, so they couldn't offend an elder's descendant. Have you reported it to sect head Wei? Yi Lu answered, Junior already explained it to sect head. Sect head told me to invite Senior Yi to talk about it. She originally wanted to see Wei Haolon to talk about her departure, but after what Elder Qingmiao said, she didn't need to mention it anymore. Nevertheless, it was reasonable for her to talk to Wei Haolon first. After all, elders only made decisions. Some execution matters still needed the sect head's approval. Emo Tienga said, I'll go now. In addition, it was best to mention Tang Shen's matter to Wei Haolon. If something really happened, she didn't want to get involved. Emo Tienga was silent all the way. When she arrived at the hall, Wei Haolon was already waiting for her. As soon as she saw Emo Tienga, she came to greet her warmly. Fellow Daoist Yi, I was held up by some mundane matters just now. I'm really sorry for making you wait for a long time. Emo Tienga smiled and returned the greeting. Sect head Wei is too polite. I didn't wait for you, so I came a bit late. Wei Haolon led her inside, and they both took their respective seats. Maids had already served them tea. Emo Tienga stayed here for several months, and Bishuan Court's hospitality had always been excellent. As soon as the two of them sat down, Wei Haolon said with a smile, Fellow Daoist Yi, I know a bit about why you came here. However, fellow Daoist Yi should have met Elder Qingmiao, right? Emo Tienga said frankly, Yes, I originally came to say goodbye, but now I don't need to. Apparently, Wei Haolon already knew Elder Qingmiao's plan. Now that she heard what Elder Qingmiao said, she said, It seems fellow Daoist Yi has agreed to Elder Qingmiao's request. Emo Tienga nodded. Since Senior Qingmiao has sincerely invited me, I'll have to trouble sect head Wei for a few more days. Wei Haolon smiled happily. What are you talking about, fellow Daoist Yi? If you can stay, everyone in my sect will be very happy. Does fellow Daoist Yi have anything to prepare for this matter? If there's anything you don't like, please don't hesitate to tell me. About that, Emo Tienga muttered to herself. There were naturally many things she didn't like about concocting medicinal pills. For example, the spiritual aura in the concocting room wasn't abundant enough, the grade of the pill furnace wasn't high enough, and the earthly fire was also a bit lacking. However, Bishuan Court still couldn't meet her requirements. Sect Leader Wei, the earth fire in your sect's concocting room is fine for concocting other medicinal pills, but it's a bit lacking when it comes to concocting clear sky pills. If you have a better concocting fire, you should be able to increase the chances of successfully concocting pills. Wei Haolon immediately said, What kind of concocting fire does fellow Daoist Yi think you can find? If I can find one, I'll definitely use the entire sect's strength to find one for you. Xianxia smiled. That's not necessary. When it comes to concocting fires, the most common ones are naturally cultivators Dantian real fire, followed by external fires like heavenly fire and earthly fire. Among them, the best are the three great real fires: sun real fire, earthly pole real fire, and samadhi real fire. The easiest to obtain is earthly pole real fire, which can be obtained as long as the earthly fire vein reaches a certain level. However, this isn't something that can be obtained just by begging. If there aren't any good earthly fire veins in Linhai, there's nowhere to get them. Therefore, after thinking about it, I can only ask the three core formation elders for help. Wei Haolan was puzzled. What should the three elders do to find a good concocting fire? There's no need to find one. Xianxia shook her head. Sun real fire can only be found by chance, and samadhi real fire hasn't appeared for many years. None of the three great real fires can be found in a short time. Only the Dantian real fire of high-level cultivators can match the effects of the three great real fires in pill concocting. Although the concocting fire of core formation cultivators isn't as good, it's much better than the earthly fire currently used in concocting rooms. It should be enough to concoct clear sky pills. Oh, I see. Wei Haolan understood what she meant. Fellow Daoist Yi wants the three elders to use their Dantian real fires to help you concoct medicinal pills? Correct. Xianxia nodded. Of course. The three elders can take turns to rest. Even if it's a bit slow, I reckon 3 days should be enough. This? Wei Haolan hesitated. She thought for a moment then asked, Fellow Daoist Yi, the three elders are the cultivators with the highest cultivation levels in Bishuan Court. Usually, when the three elders are here, other disciples won't dare to offend you, but if the three elders are all tied up by other matters, I understand what sect headway means, Xianxia said with a smile. That's why I said the three elders can take turns to rest. One elder only needs to provide Dantian real fire. Then what about spiritual aura consumption? Is it possible that one of the elders is providing Dantian real fire while the other two are recovering? Xianxia shook her head. Rest assured, sect headway. According to my estimation, when one elder runs out of spiritual aura, another elder will be able to recover. If they use restorative panaceas, their recovery speed will be even faster. Oh, I see. That being said, there would always be one elder in a state of abundant spiritual aura. Wei Haolan felt relieved and said with a smile, That's easy. I'll explain it to the three elders later. Apart from that, does fellow Daoist Yi have any other requests? Xianxia thought for a moment then shook her head. None for the time being. Wei Haolan heaved a sigh of relief. Her one request already mobilized the three core formation elders. If she had any other requests, she didn't know whether she could fulfill them or not. That being the case, fellow Daoist Yi should rest for a few days. In a few days, when the materials are ready, I'll let fellow Daoist Yi have a look. Xianxia nodded. She indeed had to rest for a few days to adjust her body's condition to its peak. That way, her senses would be sharper. However, she hesitated for a moment then said, Sect head Wei, there's one thing I don't know whether I should tell you or not. What is it? Wei Haolan was a bit puzzled by Xianxia's expression. Xianxia said, Just now, fellow Daoist Tang Xin from your group mentioned to me whether I could take him with me if I leave. Wei Haolan was startled, then shocked. Her sharp gaze immediately swept over Xianxia. Xianxia knew Wei Haolan misunderstood her. She sighed and continued to say, I know fellow Daoist Tang is the beloved grandson of an elder from your group, so I refused. Sect head Wei, please forgive me. Fellow Daoist Tang hasn't traveled before, so if he wants someone to take him with him, he should be accompanied by a fellow disciple. It's not appropriate for me to take matters into my own hands. Wei Haolan was also a sensible person. She immediately understood the meaning behind Xianxia's words and said with a smile, Fellow Daoist Yi, you're being too polite. This matter was presumably Junior Marshal Brother Tang's impulsive action, and it was originally inappropriate. It's only natural that fellow Daoist refused. Seeing that Wei Haolan understood what she meant, Emotienga smiled and said, I'll talk to sect head Wei about this matter. Alright, I'll go back and rest. I'll have to trouble sect head Wei to handle other chores. Of course. Fellow Daoist, please go. Wei Haolan cordially saw her off. When Emotienga returned to the VIP building, the maid named Liusu was already waiting outside. She was holding a pure white spiritual beast in her arms. Its spiritual aura didn't seem to be rich, it seemed to be only in the first rank. As soon as she saw Emotienga, Liusu bowed and saluted her. Senior Yi, Jr. was ordered by Grandmaster to bring Fei here. No need to be so polite. Emotienga looked at the Fei in Liusu's arms and asked curiously, This is a Fei? Why does it look like it's only in the first rank? Liusu answered, Senior, this Fei is still a cub. Our Grandmaster caught it not long ago, it was just born at that time. Moreover, Fei are spiritual beasts with mediocre cultivation levels. Generally, adult Fei are only in the second or third rank. They have a kind of miraculous ability. No matter how ferocious a spiritual beast is, it can coexist peacefully with them. So that's how it is. Emotienga reached out her hand and stroked the little beast that looked like a fox but was only as big as a kitten. Its eyes were closed. She didn't know whether it was sleeping or not, but it didn't move at all and let Emotienga stroke it. Liusu handed the Fei to her. Senior Yi, this spiritual beast has already hatched, so it can't recognize its master. However, Senior can use your divine comprehension to establish a contract with it to make it obey you. Contract? Emotienga raised her eyebrows. Isn't a spiritual beast contract a contract to recognize its master? Liusu was dumbfounded, but she soon smiled and said, Senior, don't you know that there's a kind of spiritual beast contract where both parties sign a contract? Seeing that Emotienga really didn't know, she explained, presumably, Senior doesn't know much about spiritual beasts, right? If the spiritual beast hasn't hatched yet, we can drip blood on it to recognize its master, but if it's already hatched, we can establish a subordinate contract with it. This can only be done if your divine comprehension is much stronger than the spiritual beasts. With this kind of spiritual beast contract, not only can the spiritual beast not harm its master, but the master also can't harm the spiritual beast. I see. Emotienga roughly understood. Generally speaking, after a spiritual beast recognized its master, even its life belonged to its master, and the master didn't have any obligations. However, with this subordinate contract, the master could only order the spiritual beast, but it didn't mean he had the spiritual beast. After thinking it through, Emotienga asked, Miss, can you tell me how to establish a subordinate contract? Liusu smiled and said, This isn't a secret technique, so of course I can. She then told Emotienga in detail how to establish the contract. In the end, she said, Senior Yi, rest assured. This subordinate contract can be cancelled. Grandmaster Qingyao already cancelled the contract before, so you can establish a new contract with the Fei. I understand. Thank your Grandmaster on my behalf. Liusu bowed, gave her a jade slip that recorded how to raise a Fei, then took her leave. As soon as Liusu left, Yi Lu and Yi Qiu surrounded her. So this is a Fei. It looks so cute. Yes, it looks like a raccoon, but it's much cuter than a raccoon. The two of them had been with Emotienga for a long time, so they were familiar with her temperament, so they dared to get close to her. Emotienga smiled and asked, Haven't you seen a Fei before? Yi Qiu looked up and said, Fei are very rare. Although they don't have any attack power, their ability to find spiritual objects is very good, and they look cute. Whenever one appears, the asking price is extremely high. How could we have the money to buy one? Yi Qiu said, Even if we have the money, we can't buy one. Even the sect head doesn't have one, so how could we have a chance? That's right. In other words, this Fei was really rare. Elder Qingyao was really willing to pay to befriend her. Chapter 204. After obtaining the Feifei, Imotienga followed Liusu's instructions and signed a subordinate contract with it. She then gave this little spiritual beast to Yilu and Ichio to take care of. She didn't take it with her because she didn't have time right now and because Yilu and Ichio liked this kind of spiritual beast very much and always wanted to touch and hug it, so she might as well comply with their wishes. Spiritual beasts like the Feifei were cute, harmless, and had the function of calming one's mind and searching for spiritual objects, so girls liked them the most. However, Imotienga didn't have much of a woman's temperament. She also had the spirit-concealing pendant and countless medicinal pills, so she only had a dispensable attitude towards the Feifei. However, this was Elder Qingmiao's kind intentions, so it would be embarrassing if she didn't accept it. After resting for a few days, she began to prepare to concoct clear sky pills. Imotienga was already very familiar with concocting clear sky pills, but this was the first time the people from Bichuan Court concocted clear sky pills, so they were extremely nervous. Xia Qing asked her more than once whether she could really concoct them. At first, Imotienga comforted her, but in the end, she simply didn't answer. She had already concocted clear sky pills countless times. Even if she used an ordinary concocting furnace and a core formation cultivator's concocting fire, she would still have a success rate of more than 60%. If everything went according to her plan and no one made a mistake, her success rate would reach 70%. If she told Elder Qingmiao about this, she would probably be very happy. Even in Kunwu, it would be very difficult to find a concocting master with a success rate of 70%, so she could only look for one in a pill concocting sect like Pill Cauldron sect. Several days passed in the blink of an eye. The preparations for concocting clear sky pills were completed, and Xia Qing showed the processed spiritual plants to Imotienga. Although their age wasn't too high and their quality wasn't very good, the amount was quite enough. Taking into account the failure rate, she estimated she could make about 30 pills. Clear sky pills weren't the aura-nourishing pills or aura-converging pills used by aura-refining cultivators. They contained a large amount of spiritual aura, so it would take about 10 days to half a month to refine the spiritual aura inside each pill. This many clear sky pills should be enough for the 3 core formation cultivators to cultivate for more than half a year. As for core formation cultivators, it was very rare for them to continuously use medicinal pills to cultivate. This number was already a very impressive number. Imotienga told Wei Haolan her conclusion. As a result, the 3 core formation elders wanted to see her on the same day. Imotienga had seen a lot of core formation cultivators, so she didn't feel nervous at all. However, these 3 core formation cultivators were the best cultivators in Bichuan Court after all, so it was better for her to act a bit more cautiously. After being led by Wei Haolan for a long time, Imotienga finally arrived at a floating pagoda towering in the clouds. Wei Haolan introduced, "This pagoda was built by the founder of our sect. It's called the Tao Achieving Pagoda. This pagoda is very special. The spiritual aura here is very rich, and the spiritual aura on each floor doesn't interfere with each other. Because of that, once cultivators form their gold cores in Bichuan Court, they'll move to this pagoda to cultivate." Imotienga stared at the pagoda floating in the clouds and shrouded in immortal aura. She sighed and said, "Turns out there's actually such a marvelous sight in this world. If I didn't go out, I wouldn't have known the world was so vast." Just by standing outside the pagoda, one could already feel the spiritual energy in the pagoda assaulting one's senses. One could imagine how thick the spiritual energy in the pagoda was. The founder of Bichuan Court was indeed an outstanding person of her generation. Wei Haolan smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist, ye understands this very well, and you're also the descendant of a famous cultivation group. Presumably, several hundred years later, you'll also have a chance to reach the great Tao." Imotienga shook her head with a smile but didn't say anything else. When they reached the bottom of the pagoda, they saw a transporting formation laid on the ground. Wei Haolan invited Imotienga to stand on it, then the transporting formation was activated. A white light flashed, and the 2 of them were already standing inside the pagoda. The inside of the pagoda was very spacious, but it was empty aside from several praying mats. Upon seeing them, A middle-aged male cultivator with 3 strands of long beard walked towards them. Greetings to the sect head. Perhaps because this male cultivator was a core formation cultivator's personal disciple, he obviously wasn't as frightened as the other male cultivators when facing Wei Haolan. His attitude was polite, but his expression was calm. Wei Haolan's attitude was also quite polite. Senior Martial Brother Shangguan, I brought this fellow Daoist Yi to see the 3 elders. Do the 3 elders have time? The male cultivator's gaze fell on Mo Tiange and he quickly sized her up. He seemed a bit surprised at her young age, but he very politely withdrew his gaze and nodded towards her. So this is fellow Daoist Yi. Mo Tiange was also quite surprised because this male cultivator was actually a late-stage foundation building cultivator. Moreover, he seemed to have already reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm. Mo Tiange raised her hands and clasped her hands in return. The male cultivator's gaze returned to Wei Haolan. The elders are on the 3rd floor. They're waiting for the 2 of you. Thank you, Senior Martial Brother Shangguan. After Wei Haolan expressed her gratitude, she pulled Mo Tiange to the other side, then stepped on the transporting formation again. The transporting formation was activated. After the white light faded, the 2 of them went to the next floor. This floor was empty. Fellow Daoist Yi, aren't you very curious? Among our foundation building cultivators, the one with the highest cultivation level is actually Senior Martial Brother Shangguan? Mo Tiange turned her head, feeling puzzled. This was Bishuan Court's business. She didn't ask, so why did Wei Haolan want to talk about it? Wei Haolan's expression was still as calm as ever, but there was a hint of jealousy in the corners of her eyes. She said flatly, who told Senior Martial Brother Shangguan to be a cultivator with mutated spiritual roots that we haven't recruited in several hundred years? Wei Haolan then turned to smile at Mo Tiange. Fellow Daoist Yi, don't you think it's very interesting? Bishuan Court is a cultivation group for female cultivators, but the disciple with the highest aptitude is actually a male disciple. Mo Tiange shook her head. The matter of spiritual roots has always been difficult to control. Whether it's a man or a woman isn't something that can be decided by human strength. Take Xianxia School for example. In the entire school, in terms of aptitude, she was probably the one with the highest, right? However, for several generations, not only were all the genius disciples with single spiritual roots at Xianxia School male, but among the 6 great nascent soul cultivators, there was only 1 female cultivator. You're right. Wei Haolan smiled bitterly. Alas, although we all know it's not Senior Martial Brother Shangguan's fault, we still feel embarrassed. In fact, weren't the 3 elders the same? But there's nothing we can do about it. Senior Martial Brother Shangguan is currently the cultivator most likely to reach core formation in our sect, and he even has a chance to advance to nascent soul. It's been more than 1,000 years since a nascent soul cultivator appeared in our Bishuan Court. We can't miss this opportunity, even if it's a male cultivator. At the end of her speech, Wei Haolan's face revealed a resolute expression. Mo Tiange couldn't help but admire Wei Haolan. Although she was jealous, she was still able to restrain herself for the sake of the sect. Such a person was indeed suitable to be a sect leader. Sect head Wei's magnanimity is admirable. Wei Haolan shook her head. In fact, I feel very uncomfortable inside. I feel stifled if I don't say it out loud. I know fellow Daoist Yi isn't a talkative person, but it's hard for me to say these words to my fellow martial sisters. A male cultivator is actually the most promising cultivator our Bishuan Court has spent all of its resources to cultivate. Even I have to be summoned by the 3 elders to enter this Dao-achieving pagoda, but he broke the rules of this place and started cultivating here as soon as he built his foundation. At this point, Mo Tiange suddenly felt a bit strange. Sect head Wei, since this fellow Daoist Shangguan has outstanding talents and has always been cultivated with all our might, why does he still look like a middle-aged man? Wei Haolan was dumbfounded but soon smiled. Fellow Daoist Yi came from Kunwu, so you don't know about the situation in Linhai. If there were enough medicinal pills, Senior Martial Brother Shangguan would have long formed his gold core. It's just that he's always lacked medicinal pills and couldn't concoct dustless pills, so he's been delayed for many years. Oh, I see. Mo Tiange finally understood. Wasn't the reason Bichuan court treated her so warmly because of her pill concocting skills? They lacked resources and their pill concocting skills were also backward. Even talented cultivators would find it hard to stand out. The two of them stayed on this floor for a while. Wei Haolan heaved a sigh to relieve her mood before she smiled again. Fellow Daoist Yi, let's go up. The third floor is just above us. Mo Tiange nodded, then followed Wei Haolan into the transporting formation. With a flash of white light, they arrived on the third floor. They're here. Mo Tiange heard a kind voice, so she looked towards the direction of the voice. She saw 3 core formation female cultivators sitting on this floor. The one on the left was Elder Qingmiao. The one on the right looked like she was in her early 30s. She looked well-maintained and was very beautiful. Mo Tiange found some similarities between Tang Xin and her face, so she guessed this must be Elder Qingxi. As for the female cultivator in the middle, she looked the most powerful, so she must be the cultivator with the highest cultivation level in Bichuan court, Elder Qingyi. She looked about the same age as Elder Qingmiao, but she looked much kinder. Wei Haolan led Mo Tiange over, then respectfully greeted the 3 elders. Haolan greets the 3 elders. Elder Qingyi, who was in the middle, smiled and said, "No need to be so polite." Her voice was the same as before. "Thank you, elder." Wei Haolan stood up and introduced them to Mo Tiange. "These are the 3 core formation elders of our group. Fellow Daoist, ye should have met Elder Qingmiao before. These are Elder Qingyi and Elder Qingxi." Mo Tiange's guess was correct. The one in the middle was Elder Qingyi, and the one on the right was Elder Qingxi. Junior greets the 3 elders. Mo Tiange cupped her hands and saluted them. The 3 elders were interested to see her neither servile nor overbearing manner. Elder Qingyi smiled and said, "Little friend, ye doesn't need to be so polite." She then turned to the other 2 elders and said, "Sure enough, you're from a famous cultivation group. You can't find many people with this kind of bearing in our group." Elder Qingmiao nodded. "Senior martial sister is right. It seems we have to send more disciples out to gain experience in the future. They'll only grow if they gain more experience." Speaking of gaining experience, Las Yen and the others have been away for almost 2 years, but there's still no news from them. Mo Tiange's heart skipped a beat when she heard this, but her expression remained unchanged. "Oh, right, little friend Yi is here." Elder Qingyi saw Mo Tiange standing there and said with a smile, "Little friend Yi, please forgive me. I'm old, so I'm a bit muddle-headed." Mo Tiange smiled and lowered her gaze. "You flatter me. Senior doesn't look old at all. Hee, we're cultivators. How can we take our appearances seriously?" Elder Qingyi chuckled. "Old is old. No matter how well we take care of ourselves, it's useless. However, little friend Yi is very young. It seems you're not even 50 years old yet, right?" Mo Tiange answered, "Senior has good eyesight. Junior is 39 years old now." Little friend Yi is indeed young and promising. At such a young age, not only do you have outstanding pill concocting skills, but your cultivation level is also in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Mo Tiange was startled and raised her head. Elder Qingyi, who was still smiling amiably, said slowly, "What's even rarer is that little friend Ye's breath-concealing technique is also so outstanding that even core formation cultivators can't see through it." You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.